Fuck it, I want to keep going. I don't feel like writing. Well, I do feel like writing, but I also feel like playing more Resident Evil 4. I can't do both, as I've decided I'm doing this. But wow, during dinner I felt exhausted. This feeling of being stressed and exhausted is something I only get after a hard day of school or after a really hard session of doing my writing and stuff. What the fuck? Alright, so it looks like the times I've saved is now back to equilibrium with the chapter count, but I should be able to lessen that once again soon enough. Assuming I don't do anything stupid.
In 1962, writer William Melvin Kelly's article in the New York Times, "If you're woke, dig it," used the term as an example of black slang that was being appropriated by the usually white 80s era. He noted that black slang is often fluid, and some terms like jive had evolved over time to mean their exact opposite. But the most recent era of woke began with Erykah Badu's song Master Teacher in 2008. Stay woke became an increasingly common refrain on Black Twitter, and bubbled to the forefront of the lexicon with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2013. According to scholar Carl Rhodes, wokeness describes a politically switched on, community-led, and solidarity-based political practice, defined by having awareness about and taking action against the oppression of black people, especially by the police. But of course, like any buzzword that gained popularity online, it took like 5 minutes before people collapsed, So by 2015, clickbait-happy BuzzFeed published an article about Orange is the New Black actor Matt McCory that called him so bae and so woke. Reading those words out loud made me feel so bad. Around 2016, according to linguist Tony Thorne, it also developed its ironic to make fun of latte slip and Prius progressives.
I actually use the buttons, I don't use the mouse wheel. I've never once used the mouse click to switch the weapons.
Now, in these cases, woke was more about liberals having the right opinions on various cultural and social matters than it was about
I definitely think I made the right choice keeping the black tail.
Right-wing politicians
it does have less load, but its reload speed and literally everything about it is just way better. At least for what I'm doing. I will give it more reload and shooting speed to sometime in the future, probably. But as of right now, it's good as it is.
Recently said that the word doesn't belong to us. Indeed, what regained prominence in Badu's song, and again in 2016 via Childish Gambino, has become the go-to response on the right whenever they're asked to pinpoint the root of all of society's problems.
He's against the woke, against wokeness. And now he's pushing the idea of some kind of, quote, woke mind virus.
So how did woke go from describing black consciousness to describing the oppression of traditional middle-class white culture, which I guess is mayonnaise? I don't know what traditional middle-class white culture is. Mayonnaise, church, watching CBS crime dramas, loveless marriages, things of that nature. To understand that, you need to look to corporate America, which, as it does with any countercultural movement, quickly incorporated wokeness into what Rhodes calls woke capitalism in his book of the same name. This, as Rhodes tells it, started in the 1950s, when the business world became fixated on corporate responsibility, i.e. they attempted to answer the question, what do corporations owe society on a moral level? Now, before you think these were bleeding hearts and suits, it's important to note the corporate responsibility movement was, from its earliest days, explicitly about self-interest. Its earliest advocates argued that if businesses behaved morally, the government would be less likely to intervene in or regulate their practices. Rhodes writes, businesses taking on social responsibility was primarily a defensive tactic to ward off what was seen as a real threat of socialism. Now, fast forward to the shitty 1970s economy, and then the rise of neoliberalism in the 80s, and the guiding ethos of corporate America became the shareholder value. This was the idea that the primary purpose of any business was to maximize profit for its shareholders. It was accompanied by things like corporate raiding of smaller companies and soaring pay packages for execs who were good little profit-maximizing boys, and only sometimes were complete psychos. Interestingly, throughout the 80s and 90s, the idea of corporate social responsibility, CSR, took off, but only insofar as acts of social responsibility helped the shareholders' bottom line, often by generating positive publicity. Starbucks offered free tuition programs for employees. Companies like IKEA and Nike pledged to crack down on child labor in their supply chain. Chevron employees saved endangered butterflies. They saved endangered butterflies and made a bunch of gas. I hope that after the hit that they all got butterfly tattoos on their lower backs. For anyone who's really young, there was this period in the early 2000s where a lot of people all at once got butterfly tattoos on their lower backs. It was a real movement, and someone should write a book on why.
Wait, what? Did I not shoot?
Now, as the millennium ended, Rhodes argued that CSR persisted as a salve for collective skepticism towards corporate America after the Enron fallout and the dot-com bust. Amidst rising inequality, corporations with an apparent do-gooder spirit were viewed favorably. Rhodes writes, what were once social problems became recast as strategic opportunities for business. The connection of social responsibility with corporate power and shareholders' value formed the basis of what would become woke capitalism. And guys, it's confession time. Your buddy Michael got caught up in this in 2003 when I paid extra for a Motorola Razr flip phone that was from U2's Red campaign because it was going to help end AIDS in Africa. If you're from Motorola, let me know in the comments how that turned out. Now, woke capitalism is interesting because it came to fruition in an era directly following about 40 years of shareholder value tax money and rapidly increasing income inequality. Today, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, and Jeff Bezos have as much personal wealth as the bottom 50% of Americans. Philosopher Frederick Gross classifies the present as an age of decency, i.e. inequality so disgusting we needed a new term for it. According to Rhodes, today corporations seek a moral justification for their existence, positioning themselves as the saviors of the exploitative inequality generating system that they produce. Woke capitalism is that moral justification, an attempt to bathe business in ethical flow, so that the excesses of inequality that is produced don't create an angry mob hell-bent on destroying it. Now, this is sometimes called woke washing, kind of like the way that greenwashing is used to describe posturing as environmentally aware. Think about stuff like the infamous Kendall Jenner Pepsi commercial, which somehow argues that Antifa and the police would all get along. They just hung out, drank a cold Pepsi. Also, if you're someone who, if you have the option to drink a Coke or Pepsi product, choose Pepsi. In the comments, let us know why. I've never seen a person drink Pepsi. I don't know who's drinking Pepsi. I want to know if you're drinking Pepsi. But according to Rhodes, there's a pretty big problem with this. Specifically, woke washing represents corporate America's staggering intrusion from the economic realm into the political, from private to the public. This, he argues, undermines democracy, given that democracy is predicated on the equal political power of each citizen. At the same time, the very wealthiest Americans have become more sophisticated than ever at evading taxes, i.e. avoiding their responsibility to
Look
pay
at
their
that damage. All he did was fucking grab me.
Air, clean water, and so on. The top 1% of Americans dodges an estimated $163 billion a year in taxes, according to the U.S.
Who do you think
Department
you are?
of Treasury. It's easy to imagine that if they
Spot
actually contributed reasonable taxes, it would facilitate conditions for things like government-subsidized education, healthcare, and so on. Instead, billionaires like Jeff Bezos, who recently donated $10 million to fight climate change,
I say
are
they're
increasingly
bullshit.
dedicating themselves
Leon
to
should just be
fulfilling certain
complaining.
roles that
He has the right.
belong to the state.
He's been
Atlantic
complaining
writer
since the
Franklin Ford
start,
calls
actually,
this
though.
the new private state, where public goods are dispensed at the whim
Yeah, I'll use
of
it
a
right now.
virtue-signaling private elite. This all recalls Andrew Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth, which argued that inequality was inevitable, even morally right, but that it was the job of the wealthy to decide how to spend their money to help the poor. Now, under the system, and with an increasingly strapped social safety net, the supremely wealthy have the power to decide what kinds of services or even political rights the disenfranchised deserve. Now, in this way, woke capitalism starts to look a whole lot like table crumbs thrown down by the towering giants of industry. Rhodes writes, woke capitalism buttresses a self-satisfied ruling elite who believe that their wealth is deserved. At the same time, it's worth thinking about what kinds of causes woke corporations are most often aligning themselves with. Stuff like LGBTQ rights, girl bossy feminism, diversity in the workplace, and so on. Helen Lewis at The Atlantic notes that companies reliably align with socially radical rather than economically radical causes, essentially allowing them to garner progressive street cred without threatening the economic order the way, say, pushing for UBI or stronger unions. She calls this the iron law of woke capitalism, writing that brands will gravitate toward low-cost, high-noise signals as a substitute for genuine reform. Rather than challenging the system, this merely reinforces it and the elite's power to move over. So, like, we can celebrate Pride Month at work, but we're still going to work 60 hours a week while barely meeting rent. And then paying so much for healthcare on top of the fact that I have a health plan. It's like, what's the point of having health insurance if I go to the doctor because my thumb hurts? And we're like, oh, I'll do a little x-ray. I'm not going to go because it was $30. Real thing that happened. My thumb hurt. Go to the doctor. There for 25 minutes. Bill comes a month later. $300, please. What the Someone explain it to me. Someone explain it to me. Slavoj Žižek argues that woke signaling becomes a way to avoid actually having to reckon with the supreme power the wealthy elite have over their collective. He writes, and we know he writes this in an essay that does have a lot of problems, they submit to woke demands because most of them really are guilty of participating in social competition. And submitting to woke demands offers a what happens. Gladly assuming guilt insofar as this enables you to go on did. This also leads to social concepts like ally. While it's of course not a bad thing to consider yourself an ally of oppressed or marginalized groups, there's a risk that once I tweet about being an ally or post a black square on my Instagram, it alleviates any social or material responsibility I feel to really do anything to make meaningful change, which is unfortunate, as the original usage of the term woke, largely in the work of black activists, artists, and writers, dealt precisely with being aware of systemic and material oppression for the sake of transforming systems. And in this way, it shares the spirit of folks like Marx, who thought that the point of philosophy wasn't simply to understand the world, but to transform the world. And Plato, whose allegory of the cave argues that seeing past ideologies and illusions to get at what's really going on is an essential act of seeking wisdom. But for the woke capitalist, this has turned into aligning your brand with cultural and social signifiers that make you good. And it's not just billionaires and CEOs allaying their guilt with performative wokeness. Woke capitalism offers us all a way to purchase virtue. Buying some rainbow Legos is a lot easier than doing the hard work of learning or organizing. New York Times columnist and broken clock Ross Douthat even argues that brand identification with a woke company fills a certain hole, giving us a sense that we share certain collective values, a feeling that used to be provided by robust community. And woke capitalism has been critical to twisting the word's original meaning. Because conservatives are right in some ways. Yeah, I said it. Feel free to rewind that and play it back if you thought you heard me wrong. Corporations are behaving quite cynically with their activism. The fact that people started profiting off of wokeness has transformed a radical political ethos into what many see as merely an excuse for grandstanding. It's not surprising that it pisses so many people off. Woke capitalism is about generating profits and being congratulated for doing so. As Rhodes writes, feel-good corporate self-righteousness did nothing to make any real changes to the heart of capitalism's agenda. If anything, it strengthened it. Corralling wealth in the direction of the owners of capital remained the name of the game. We'd argue that woke capitalism is in fact quite pernicious, just not in the way Fox News thinks. Because corporate America's adoption of performative wokeness has, as it so often does, seeped into the culture at large. This version of wokeness has almost nothing to do with the term's original meaning, which focused on raised consciousness and collective action. And a lot more to do with companies trying to seem good, so we'll buy shit. And on the downstream, people trying to seem good to achieve social capital. You know, like becoming good allies without leaving their condoms. Liberal political activism increasingly places its focus on cultural products. You know, rainbow Legos, t-shirts that show that you have good politics, stickers on your car that make you seem like you're on the right side of history, and identities, like how many Fortune 500 female CEOs there are. In doing so, it's ignoring material, economic, and historical conditions that lead to systemic inequalities and oppression across race, class, gender, and sexual identity. Making your social media avatar a black box might signify wokeness in a way that gives you a progressive street cred. But unless that's translated into material action, all it really means means is that you understand how to appear woke in its most reductive sense. It's the political equivalent of buying the tie-dye shirt at Target and then calling yourself a deadhead. Come on, guys, come to a show first, and then you can call yourself. Or as Professors Tejano Lopez Munyasi and Candace Watt Smith write, striving to be educated around issues of social justice is laudable and moral, but striving to be recognized by others as a woke individual is self-serving and misguided. So to those of you who are making a competition out of racial consciousness and progressive politicking, please get over yourself. But anyway, what do you guys think? Are the angry boys and girls of Fox News right to see wokeness as the downfall of Western civilization? This is just another example of a term for black culture being appropriated and turned into a marketable product, or, in our increasingly cynical age, is voting with our dollars about as much as we can do. Let us know what you think in the comments. I want to give a special shout out to all of our patrons who know that by supporting us with their dollars, they're not better people, but they have the chance to be, and it means a lot to us. So if you want to consider supporting us and in return getting some extra content, getting videos early, without ads,
Do I save in water, Hall?
click the link in the description, check it out if you got some money to spare.
I'm gonna try to see if I can get away with not saving.
Who are hanging out and watching videos, it means a lot to us, and we know that you don't watch these videos to become better people or to virtue signal. You do it to think about the world in such a way that develops your own consciousness and subjectivity. And it means a lot to us that you do that. It also means a lot to us when you click things and type things and do stuff that feeds the algorithm. So thanks for that. In the meantime, I don't know, stay away from buzzwords, and we'll see you later.
This ray is really loud. What's up with that? I'm pretty sure it's the loudest gun you could ever get. It goes patang! Fuck. Fuck. Seriously, those hurt really bad. I'm gonna eat the snake. The fuck was that? Seriously, I think I'm going crazy sometimes.
This video is brought to you by private internet access. College is a scam. Yeah, it's a phrase we're hearing a lot these days. Now, for some, degrees aren't a good return on investment. For others, colleges are factories mass-producing woke sheeple. For some folks, it's both. Now, we often hear that college degrees are useless, with students learning subjects that are equivalent to major investing, rather than marketable skills that help them succeed in a competitive economy. But is this an accurate representation of what education is? Or of what it should be? Florida scholar Paulo Freire argues, are these common views of education dependent on what he calls the banking model, where learning becomes little more than a transaction? Well, let's try to just figure it all out today by asking the question, what is education for? So guys, before I keep going, I want to give a shout out to this video sponsor, Private Internet Access, a VPN that can help you as you scroll around the internet doing all sorts of good, fun, and weird stuff. Now, why would you need a VPN? Well, as you're doing stuff on your phone, your computer, your tablet, you are transmitting a bunch of information that often is unprotected, meaning bad people can get it and do bad things with it. But a virtual private network, or VPN, hides your IP address and safeguards your connection, keeping your data safe. And this way, your digital life is protected from those who would want to exploit your information for their own interests. Now, one of my personal
kill
favorite things
everyone
about
here, I
VPNs,
really
besides the
spend way
safety
too
and
long in
security, is that
Waterhall.
a lot of things that I
But
might
that's
want
fine,
to
because I have way more time
or
now.
watch or listen to are protected on the basis of where I am in the world and where that content is. But using private internet access, I can access some of my favorite shows from the UK and Europe without them knowing that I'm just some guy in America. And your private internet access plan will let you cover an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. So you can protect your entire household with one subscription. And if you need more proof about why they are the world's most transparent VPN provider, well, ask these 30 million people who have downloaded private internet access. So if you have been waiting to try a VPN, and if you haven't tried one yet, what are you waiting for? Try private internet access today. If you click the link in our description, you'll get 83% off your subscription. I didn't misspeak there. 83%. That works out to $2.03 a month. You'll also get 4 months for free. So click the link in the description to make your data way more safe today. And now let's get back to the show. Now, for most of my lifetime, a college degree has been seen as a sort of one-way ticket to the American middle class or better. But recently, it seems like we're all asking if this is actually the case. According to a 2023 Wall Street Journal NORC poll, 56% of Americans agree that a 4-year degree is not worth the cost because people often graduate without specific job skills and with a large amount of debt to pay off. Imagine that. The Wall Street Journal also spoke to multiple college graduates who believe that they will be unable to pay back their student loans and that they will not see a return on investment. I've said this on here before, but I just had an insane amount of student loan debt that I'll probably never pay back. The number keeps getting bigger even as I'm paying. If you want to share your student loan debt number in the comments, feel free. You show me yours and I'll show you mine. Meanwhile, conservative politicians are increasingly decrying universities for what they perceive as woke indoctrination and professors' ideological agendas. Take the New College of Florida. Now, when I was going to high school in Sunshine State, this is where you went if you wanted to go to a state school that would let your freak flag fly. But recently, Governor Meatball Ron DeSantis has been cracking down and adding right-wing activists like Christopher Rufo to the board. Also, if you're going to be like, Meatball Ron, Trump says that, you're supporting Trump. No, but he said a funny thing. Sometimes he says funny stuff. If you can't accept that, I don't know what to tell you.
I did everything right and they indicted me.
According to an op-ed by 2 professors at New College, what the DeSantis administration is trying to do, in brief, is force a conservative Christian model of education onto our public college, attempting to choke out hard-won academic freedom. And DeSantis has created new rules about what can be taught at state universities that have led some professors to stop teaching courses dealing with questions of race and gender, and some to lose or leave their positions. DeSantis ties the themes of economic viability and ideological control together in a recent speech announcing his ban on college diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI departments.
If you look at the way this has actually been implemented across the country, DEI is better viewed as standing for discrimination, exclusion, and indoctrination. That has no place in our public institution.
In reference to the field of gender studies, DeSantis asked,
How employable are you with some of these majors?
and declared,
We want to focus on the classical mission of what a university is supposed to be.
Now, we've talked about this before, but in recent years, universities, or at least their board members and administrators, seem to think that the mission of college is largely just job training. Marymount University in Virginia has announced its plans to cut majors in English, philosophy, history, and sociology, aka subjects that we use in basically every wisecrack video. Now, according to journalist Nick Anderson, this move shows the continuing vulnerability of humanities and higher education at a time when pressure is high to deliver degrees that many students and families perceive as more valuable in the job market. In case you're wondering, I care a lot about this because I was a humanities professor for a lot of years. I taught philosophy at universities. And I got out before it got real crazy, but it makes you sad to look back at a field that you loved and see what's happening to it. So, solidarity to all my fellow current, past, and present humanities professors out there. I'd give you something if we could. We have nothing to give. Now, it's not shocking that Americans, and increasingly folks from around the world, have a dollars and cents attitude towards the educational system. Yeah, it's not just an American thing. When I taught England, we had to teach people how to write resumes in a class on Kant's third critique. It was crazy.
They run
One of the
so
reasons I
fast.
left, along with crippling depression. But what if this cash rules everything around me attitude is also affecting the way that we view educational practice and learning itself? Okay, so to take Meatball Ron at his word, what is the classical mission of education? Well, it doesn't get that much more classical than Aristotle. And for him, the aim of education is to cultivate character. Because education is directly connected to politics, those with a cultivated character will also become virtuous and well-informed citizens. This is basically his pitch for creating a functional democracy. Because seriously, imagine a world where the only education that matters is like STEM subjects that get you jobs, and then you have to vote in elections, and you know nothing about politics, history, philosophy, religion, all these things that matter so much, and what it means to be a political human, and you're just like, I don't know, I have a computer phone. Now, for Aristotle, education prepares students to be good citizens who think freely, rather than being overly influenced by their passions or the opinions of others. It also entails being aware of a variety of positions, even those you might not naturally be inclined to agree with. In America, it's common to think of education as a means to an end, not an end in itself, meaning that the point of an education isn't to be educated, it's to use that education to make money. This is because our society likes to tell us that self-actualization and happiness don't come from character or virtue, but from career success, earning potential. And to be fair to those who think education is primarily a path to wealth, earning a college degree does offer some advantages. According to journalist Jessica Dickler, bachelor's degree holders generally earn 75% more than those with just a high school diploma. So it makes sense for American students, parents, universities, and even politicians to prioritize job training and earning potential when considering the value of a college education. But of course, this clashes with the classic Aristotelian model in which education is a preparation for life, not just a necessary evil on your way to the C-suite. Now, somewhat ironically, considering recent debates, many of the banned subjects, basically anything to do with race, gender, or critical theory, are consistent with the intellectual and social goals of classical education. Because when students understand things like racism, patriarchy, sexuality, and ideology critique more generally, they can better evaluate whether or not society is actively furthering the common good, and think critically about inequality and injustice. But of course at this point, some want to have their classical education cake without actually having any idea what a classical education consists of. For example, while it critiques humanities and social science professors for perpetuating an agenda, the Florida government is busy promoting their own ideological agenda. And real quick, if any Floridians think I'm unfairly picking on your state, I'm speaking from lived experience. I lived there for a while. I went to school in Florida. This is a product of the Florida public education system, so, you know, think before you get defensive, okay? I'm critiquing from a place of confused love. Also, your state looks like a wiener. For example, state-provided education materials include slides that said it was a misconception that the Founding Fathers wanted strict separation of church and state, and that they, in fact, wanted religion to be promoted. The same slides mention that the Founding Fathers were against slavery, even though they owned slaves. They owned slaves, but I guess they were against it.
Hey, the penance brand and invented cocaine. He's coming, he's coming, he's coming.
These folks are worried about authoritarianism in education, in which teachers affected with the woke mind virus indoctrinate students with dangerous ideas, like some people are gay, or enslaved people built much of this country, or Judy Blume wrote some cool books. Also, if you haven't watched it, there's a Judy Blume documentary out right now. Watched it the other night. Amazing. I'm a huge Judy Blume head. And here, they're at least kind of correct, in so much as the American education system really is set up to indoctrinate students, just not in the way that they think. And right-wing worries that left-wing opinions can be instilled by force as if downloaded through a brain implant indicates a misunderstanding of how learning works in the first place. This understanding of education in which teachers just sort of like drop facts and information into a student's brain box as if they're being deposited into a bank is what Brazilian philosopher and educator Paulo Freire called the banking model of education. In this model, students are seen as piggy banks, and teachers are kids with pockets full of nickels. According to Freire, when teachers are thought of as bank clerks, he also calls them domesticators and prescribers, there is no real sense of teacher-student partnership. Rather than a hierarchical relationship between educator and student, He thinks education should operate with a more Socratic model, in which teacher and student operate on a similar level, in which teachers are open to learning from their students. This is why, according to Freire, relying on a banking model is bad pedagogy, as teaching to the test fails to produce deep understanding. But seriously though, there are some tests that I studied for in high school and college that operated this way, and if my life depended on it, I could not tell you what trigonometry is. Gun to my head. Couldn't tell you what it is. The scholar Brian Wish describes it. According to Freire, the banking model is not just oppressive, it is also ineffective. It decontextualizes knowledge, leading students to merely memorize the material by rote, rather than understanding it conceptually. This discourages critical thinking and conditions people to accept authority without question. Under this model, students learn to passively accept what they're taught, as when there isn't space for discussion and dialogue, there isn't space for questions and critique. And that's why it's so concerning that some states flirt with ideas like not teaching political theories, like socialism or communism, or dedicate time to teaching about why any ideological alternatives to capitalism are bad. To be clear, I'm not saying that we should teach people that capitalism is bad and you should all be Trotskyists. I'm simply saying both. We gotta learn them all, and we gotta think for ourselves. Is that bad? Is that bad? Tell me if it's bad. And this is why Freire challenges the notion that knowledge is a gift bestowed by those who consider themselves knowledgeable upon those whom they consider to know nothing. He writes, knowledge emerges only through invention and reinvention, through the restless, impatient, continuing, hopeful inquiry human beings pursue in the world, with the world, and with each other. He's describing learning as an active and engaged process of discovery, questioning and re-questioning, a process which doesn't create tiny humans who are packed with information, like USB storage drives that love cartoons and sometimes wet the bed, but rather creates curious little thinkers who also sometimes wet the bed. Also, if you made it this far in the video and you're thinking, is Burns a little more jacked up than usual? I've been drinking this can of coffee I got, and it turns out that I shouldn't drink cold brew because I feel right now like I'm on the types of drugs that I've never taken. But it has to be something like this. This model of education has a political edge for Freire. Now, if that sounds scary, remember that even Aristotle thought education and politics were inherently linked. To Freire, education is a liberatory process, which means that it must create the space for questioning authority. For him, authentic liberation, the process of humanization, is not another deposit to be made in man. And no oppressive order could permit the oppressed to begin to question why. And this is what courses on things like race and gender or even history taught accurately do. They create the space to think through various modes of oppression in our society. And to quickly say something positive about Florida education, when I was in middle school, I participated in a statewide African American history curriculum and contest, and the experience was really, really transformative for me. It challenged me and made me think differently about myself, my place in society, and the place of people like me in society, and it was really important, so thanks for that, Florida. Now, anthropologist and professor David Graeber once said that he prefers self-subverting authority.
I think there are certain types of authority that you find on a basis. If you're a teacher and you teach someone very well, who knows,
In other words, great educators should be creating the conditions for their own obsolescence. They should teach students what they know, encourage them to think critically, and push them to go even further. Remember, guys, even the greatest teacher of his day taught people that the sun revolved around the earth.
And he disproved that theory, making Aristotle and everybody else on Earth look like a bitch.
And this is why Freire doesn't think education should be a process in which information is deposited, tests are taken, diplomas are obtained, and jobs are acquired. Rather, education should prepare us for life and make us fully human. Asking questions about societal structures, social conditions, and political realities furthers that end, as does asking big questions about art, religion, and science. And this is why Freire thought education was a two-way street, as educators need to be challenged by the material experiences of their students, learning from their insights and being pushed to think more deeply. For Aristotle, Freire, and lots of folks in between, education isn't about getting us the job, and our jobs aren't fundamental in shaping our identities. The purpose of learning and teaching is to create a dialogue between student and teacher that fosters curiosity, empathy, critical thinking, and creativity. Now, before to wrap up, I read some comments on a recent video where some of you said, you feel like we're breaking down some intense, kind of dark topics and not leaving you with anything constructive or positive. While we don't have a magical fix for this one, I can really recommend that you read Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. It's a really, really great work written by someone who was actively engaged in the process of teaching those on the margins of society. And even though it's an intense book, it has a really hopeful tone to it. And as much as possible, we encourage everyone to support all of those people who work in education. As in this country, no one is doing something so important while getting paid so little. So to the college professors having their curriculums curtailed, to people at the elementary, middle, high school, preschool level that are dealing with book bans and angry parents and all this sort of stuff, we're with you for what it's worth. And if there is a teacher in your life, maybe take them out for a coffee or a drink, or go see a movie, get them a massage. If you're rich, get that teacher and blindfold them. Make them think that you're kidnapping them, but you're not kidnapping them. You're taking them on an around-the-world trip. For the first couple hours, use a voice changer thing and be like, time to die, motherfucker. So they're freaking out. So by the time you get to the airport and they know they're going in a private jet, they think they're dead. And now they're jet setting around the world with you, eating guacamole at 30,000 feet. Who wouldn't love that? In the meantime, let us know what you think about the role of education in society. Is knowledge just a weird sort of banking system? Should degrees equal higher salaries, or is learning a lifelong process
Some of them are dead
becoming
now,
a human?
sadly.
Let us know what you think in the comments. Thank you so much to all of our patrons for your support. Seriously, it means a lot. It helps us. If you want to join our Patreon page, which would help,
sure, I forgot
there's a
to buy
link
the
in the
TNT
description.
stock.
You get
I don't
perks
have
like
the
videos
space for
early
one
with no
here.
ads, access to our Discord server. At one level, you get office hours from a washed-up philosophy professor who will answer your questions in a way that hopefully isn't trying to ideologically brainwash you. But thanks to all of you for coming here, for creating the space for us to dig into topics like this and ask me questions. Thank you in advance for all the fun comments we're going to get. I mean that genuinely, by the way. I know it sounds sarcastic sometimes when I'm not. Do something good for a teacher, and I'll see you later. Although I should stop saying don't put that in the video, because now every time I say that, they do it, especially if it's Jackson.
It tempts them so much.
It does.
Especially Jackson.
Need more rifle. And where is the right place? Right, I want another resources. So I can make more brick. May as well check the recording. Yeah, fine. I'll go shoot everyone off first. I've got time, but I still have to hurry. So let's hurry. Hurry, hurry. I should be able to get rid of some TMP ammo very quickly. Come on. I'll ignore the gunpowder, even though I really don't want to. Fine. Man, the body armor is so useful. Well, it's technically not as useful in as the original anymore because you need to repair it. Therefore, it technically costs infinite money. But I like this nerf body armor better. If you bought the original body armor and then you never thought about it ever again. Wow, nice. Yeah, there's so many attacks, some of which are instant kill. And the body armor just blocks it. In a way, the body armor is also stronger in some aspects, while weaker in others in the remake. Because I don't think the body armor protects you from dynamite insta-kill attacks. Impossible. Oh yeah, maybe I should do the speedrun strat here. I'm pretty sure this is the place. Let's try it. It's not like space is an issue. Shit. Let me try again. Haha! Oh shit, you're super tanky, what the hell? Kinda good at dodging, too. Holy shit, she's still alive! Fuck it, fuck you! You're clearly an immortal demigod. Not sure how much time doing that text saves, but it's as long as it saves time. For speedrunners even being able to save 1 nanosecond, 1 frame. I didn't save here last time, I won't save it. I won't save today either. Right, that was actually still relatively fast, and apparently I've beaten this chapter faster. I got the necklace ready. Oh no, I need rescue. Come save me, Prince Charming. I love the delivery on it. Yeah, fuck the loot. Oh, but I do care about the birds. And the snake. The only loot that matters right now in the maze are the ones that give healing. Because we really don't need loot. Guess I'll eat the fish. Fine, I'll craft the shotgun shells. Makes me feel safe. gunpowder. Spray and pray tactic. Must have been decided to hide. Cornered yourself, idiot. Trusted imbecile. I know that wasn't the correct way to use that sentence. I think that means like you can't get back here, idiot, or something along those lines. Hey, what the? That was smooth, cha-cha. What, you lived? Okay. late reaction, I guess. Oh shit, that's a dog. I think I should just run. Ashley will catch up. I hope. Wait, what? Okay then. A brutal lesson was learned. Here. A very brutal lesson. Ah, fuck. Whoa, look at that big spider. It's gone. Oh, right, my last save is here. Okay, well, this still sucks, but I can live with this. Why are you alive? Fuck, I still have TNT ammo left over. Didn't need to be that conservative. I'll get rid of it. Magnum ammo. Whoa! Yeah, the game hands them back out like candy anyway. Even though I normally never get those on my New Game Plus playthroughs. When I have more than one on my inventory. That was a close one. It was a bit laggy, but apparently I managed to parry. Here you go, they died way faster this time. Never mind. There's always one. Who manages to make it out. Ow! Ugh. It's okay, it's just my body armor that gets hurt from now on from those things rather than a shit ton of health. Eek. I don't care about the treasure. Whew, close one. It's just a ruby. Well, that's a way to go. It's down. To death. I've got to now throw your last rock. No. That's it. There's someone after me. Eek, it's you! Persistent to the very end, huh? Sorry to say, but I'm a straight woman. No matter how many shots you fire, it simply can't be between us. I lied, I'm a raging lesbian. Okay, yeah, that wasn't the funniest punchline I could have come up with. I'll admit. If ever. Like, that was a seriously queer joke. Yeah, not much progress was lost. Wow. And I'm pretty sure I did that really fast. Yeah, look at that. Saved 2 whole minutes.
If any industry's been reduced to a cemetery plot in the popular imagination, it's journalism.
Today is National Milk Day, a day I'm sure you have been looking forward to celebrating.
Once the inspiration for cinematic heroes, journalists have increasingly become a source of skepticism, mockery, and hate. America has always prided itself on the power of its worthless state, but increasingly, it kind of feels like it's being sold on the shelves.
Instead of go-go boots, the seductress green M&M will now wear sneakers.
From sloping profits to mischievous clickbait to home misinformation, the industry is under attack, and to many, the internet seems like the obvious culprit. But is it? Maybe it's more complicated. According to Reporters Without Borders,
This isn't
America
my favorite
only has
philosopher
the
talking.
45th
Who the hell is
most
this
free press in
woman?
the world, and many seasoned journalists fear their industry is already dead. So how did we go from this to this? In short, who killed journalism? Trick question, because while we usually assume the internet is the quote reaper of the industry, there's no one culprit responsible for journalism's demise. So where did this existential crisis come from? Let's start with government, because while we might think of the press as independent, the history is way more complex. As scholar Robert W. McChesney and journalist John Nichols explain, the government in fact created the free press throughout American history with aggressive and often
I went the wrong way,
blatant
God
policies
darn
and
it.
subsidies.
So every
this
time I
massive
save, I
control,
lose
it is
equally
unlikely
as
the
much
US
time
democracy would have
doing
survived,
something
let alone lost
very,
it.
very
See, in the
stupid.
country's early days, the government supported its nascent media ecosystem through tax exemptions, government contracts, and, most notably, subsidies on postal service, which
Said
meant
no one ever.
newspapers could be delivered at a tiny fraction of the market rate, or even free. While newspapers were generally funded by political parties or special interest groups, there was plenty of room for, and dissemination of, competing views. McChesney and Nichols argued that, as a result, the growing population of the United States stayed informed and literate, and that, in turn, helped to drive economics and the engine of democracy. Commercial interests took over American media in the late 19th century, as the advertisements became the main financial support for newspapers. This commercialization was followed by the creation of the newspaper chain, in which publishers like William Randolph Hearst owned massive networks of publications. Some at the time voiced concerns that corporate and advertisers' interests might
at least
interfere
one
with the
frag
free
grenade,
press.
because I don't know if I'll
Those
be able to
last
get a
gasps
heavy
were
grenade.
evaded after the New Deal. That's in part because complaining about free enterprise started sounding a bit
And I need a grenade to do the
journalism
super cool ship.
professionalized, creating standards for objective news to justify its insistence on self-regulation. When TV news rolled around, seasoned newspaper reporters transitioned onto the screen. Importantly, in 1949, the perceived objectivity of radio and TV journalism was bolstered by what's called the Fairness Doctrine, which mandated that holders of broadcast licenses had a duty to the public interest. Thus, they needed to spend a certain amount of time covering issues of importance and giving voice to disparate points of view. Flash forward 20 years. Aspiring President Richard Nixon meets a young TV producer named Roger Ailes and hires him to advise his winning campaign. In 1970, Ailes, obsessed with the supposed liberal bias in media, wrote a plan for putting the GOP on TV news, which he thought could be paid for and run by the White House. According to him, people are lazy. With television, you just sit, watch, listen. The thinking is done for you, unlike YouTube, where you think for yourself. Though his dream was to provide pro-administration, videotape, hard news actualities, the plan today reads like a blueprint from Fox News, which Ailes would later helm. Of course, Nixon didn't last long enough for Ailes to realize his dream, but the perfect B-movie actor-shaped vessel would appear to reshape the media in Nichols' vision. As journalist Brian Jim writes, the end of a free press began in earnest. Reagan stepped into the White House. Under Ailes and FCC Chair Mark Fowler, deregulation of the media went into overdrive. Fowler, who believed that television was merely a token of pictures, wanted government out of the way, a goal best symbolized by the abolishment of the Fairness Doctrine in 1987, which freed up the network broadcasters to talk about whatever, whenever. The FCC also gutted regulation against TV news in in general, loosening limitations on how many outlets any one company could own, and thus beginning an age of corporate consolidation. They also abolished other restrictions, like limitations on the number of commercials in TV news. And while we think of journalism as merely a commercial enterprise, when it comes to radio and television, and eventually the internet, we're talking about communication infrastructure that was developed by the government via heavy public investment, and then handed off to these select companies in the name of free markets. Those companies grew insanely wealthy off our public resources. So when we talk about a duty to the public in the context of radio or broadcast television, there's actually a material basis beyond the fourth estate is pledge for democracy. As a result of Reagan's deregulation, Karen writes, the networks grew larger, and without making television owners treat their property as a trusteeship with responsibilities to protect the Commonwealth instead of preying on it, greed and avarice took over. At the same time Reagan was freeing the press from government interference, he was being very interfering with it, running what Congress eventually acknowledged was a secret propaganda campaign to rally support for his funding of the Contras war in Nicaragua. According to the Government Accountability Office, the State Department covertly set up a campaign to use prohibited propaganda activities designed to influence the media and including tips and TV news, arranging for journalists to meet Contra leaders, and even secretly ghostwriting articles for major newspapers. So under Reagan, news was deregulated and undermined by government interference. It was more of the same under the first Bush presidency, when the Gulf War posed a PR problem for a Pentagon still recovering trust after Vietnam. They now had to figure out how to show a war without any of that inconvenient bloodshed. To that end, the military actually used camera-equipped high-tech weaponry to produce video game-style coverage that the media relied on, partly because the military also limited reporter access to the war. Karen laments that true independence in the press was dead just after the Gulf War. By 1996, President Bill Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act into law, which fairness and accuracy in reporting described as a measure essentially bought and paid for by corporate media lobbies that opened the floodgates on mergers by further removing regulations. While it was sold as eliminating barriers to entry, Karen writes that it actually gave giant corporations the ability to cannibalize the industry. In 1983, approximately 80% of the media was controlled by 20 or so corporations. By 2012, 90% was controlled by just 6. Before the Act's passage, companies could only own 40 radio stations. Today, iHeartMedia owns more than 850 of the country's 15,000 commercial radio stations. And government deregulation didn't mean lack of government interference. Under George W. Bush, the Patriot Act made the surveillance of journalists an alarmingly common practice.
Trace email conversations or email messages from place to place, making it easier to surveil people.
While Obama used the Espionage Act an unprecedented 8 times to stifle the flow of information to reporters. For context, it was only used 4 times total for this. So changes in government policy reduced news from a vibrant competitive market to something of an oligopoly, while those in power used coverage for their own ends. Now let's look more closely at how big business, enabled by the government, took a machete to journalistic principles. As McChesney notes, from the late 1970s on, large corporate chains were eating up the daily newspaper industry, creating an environment rife with hyper-commercialism and denigration of journalism and public service. Further deregulation increasingly consolidated news platforms across mediums, but the effects have hit newspapers the hardest. These corporations then led their chains with what journalist Pete Hamill calls the abstract management techniques of other businesses. Cereals, real estate, parking lots. This meant cutting costs with massive layoffs. And while that's been a decades-long process, it's really escalated in recent years, with employment at newspapers plummeting by 57% from 2008 to 2020. It's also worth noting what kinds of reporting gets cut. Profit-minded thinking means less investment in important but expensive positions, like foreign correspondents, investigative journalists, and science journalists. This rigorous reporting was replaced with an increase in shock-and-awe coverage and feel-good news. Meanwhile, the growing dominance of chain newspapers and consolidation of TV news meant that the same stories were being disseminated across the country, with no local or regional variety, which is why results have been most dire from local daily newspapers, where cost-cutting measures have led lone journalists to cover beats formerly manned by 25 reporters, according to Kara. This has real consequences. Research from Notre Dame and the University of Illinois found that when newsrooms institute layoffs, taxpayers actually pay more money because there's less oversight against government corruption. But it doesn't only matter if you're a Cincinnatian reading the Cincinnati Herald. Local news has always flown upstream, with its finest coverage inspiring anywhere between 85 and 95% of professionally reported news in national newspapers and television news. As scholar Nikki Usher writes, Losing local news also
Level
leaves
4 should
national
be
news
fine.
to pick up the slack, meaning many people in the United States do not see where they live or people like them authentically presented in the news. And when news starts getting sucky, people start tuning out. Media expert Ed Herman says newspapers were once thought to bring communities together. That's not the case anymore. People aren't stupid. They recognize when their local newspaper loses interest in them as anything but consumers of advertisements. And multiple studies have found that the decrease in local news is correlated with declining public knowledge and political fragmentation. Combined with the end of the Fairness Doctrine taking away all requirements for broadcast news to be public serving, this means political knowledge
Don't worry,
is
we'll be
no
here in
longer
just 10
advertised.
seconds.
By
Or something.
2006, University of Wisconsin researchers found that local television news viewers got considerably more information about campaigns from paid political advertisements than from actual news coverage. Ever since CNN established itself as the first 24-hour broadcast network in 1980, changing formats have affected the perceived legitimacy of the news. According to scholars Martin Hurst and Roger Patching, the now constant 24-hour news cycle means that we get daily chunks of news, often disconnected from a time context. Whatever bleeds or drives a white Ford Bronco leads, and arguably, it distorts our sense of reality and even the continuity of time when a disappearing submersible briefly consumes the media, only to quickly be forgotten. The instantaneity afforded by TV news and internet technology means that audiences are primed to expect to know things in real time, which often isn't possible, forcing journalists to rely more on speculation and sensationalism than fact. At the same time, investigative journalism has been hobbled. The priciest and riskiest investment for any news outlet, investigative journalism is also arguably the most important when it comes to shining light on endemic wrongs. Ever since it was standardized in the early 20th century, investigative journalism has been used to blow a whistle on everything from racial discrimination in housing, to private military cartels, to asbestos companies, to Afghanistan war contracts. From 1993 to 1998, a Pew Research study of local TV stations found that the number of original watchdog reports fell from 1 per 60 news stories to 1 per 150. This trend accelerated again after a huge buyout in 2019, followed by massive layoffs. After the Austin American-Statesman was acquired by the National Publishing Chain in 2018, its investigative reporting went from 15 stories a month to 2. In local communities, this has real ramifications. As scholar Gregory J. Martin puts it, the worry is, who else will investigate a scandal in some small regional city? The existence of this kind of coverage is important for accountability of elected officials and has positive effects on the functioning of representative democracy. Corporate consolidation doesn't just affect the capacity of journalists to investigate corruption. It affects their editorial independence too. The consolidation of ownership, according to journalist Ned Bagdikian, gives each of the 5 corporations and their leaders more communications power to exercise by any best that earned viewership in history. Corporate consolidation effectively destroyed editorial independence, once journalism's prime currency. According to Karen, publishers are increasingly meddling in editorial coverage, especially any content deemed subversive. As he writes, if you work for a large corporation covering the news, does anyone think the board of directors would want or allow inquisitive reporters poking their noses into the corporate business? No, sir. To make matters worse, strapped budgets and increased need to churn out copy has increased journalistic reliance on PR from corporations and special interest groups. Back in 2003, Professor Ann Gregory estimated that 80% of business news and up to 50% of general news was generated or directly influenced by PR firms. They provide copy in prepared journalistic form, thus empowering spokespeople to shape the story. You're not exactly going to get hard-hitting reporting on corporate America when their well-paid foot soldiers are the ones writing the copy. Given these conditions, it's no surprise that something like the labor beat, core to news coverage from the 30s to the 60s, basically vanished by the 90s. Research by Christopher Martin found that in the 70s, coverage started focusing less on unions and more on how labor conflicts affected upscale consumers. We can see this pretty vividly in a lot of the coverage of the current writer's strike, which explains which Max shows you might not get to enjoy, instead of explaining why newbie writers are often no longer earning living wages. The focus on upscale consumers has affected news at large, because under the advertising model, news outlets are leveraging their readers' captive attention. And who are the most valuable readers? Rich ones. Which is why news has increasingly skewed toward the interest of the wealthy elite in hopes of attracting luxury advertisers. And Even if your publication runs partly on a subscription model in which patrons subsidize you, you're likely still catering to the interests and concerns of the ones who can afford to pay those dues.
I still can't buy Happy Grenade.
In the end,
recipe.
advertising and subscription models can both yield a myopic focus on issues that matter to the rich. But today's journalists aren't only pressured to write easily consumable media that appeals to corporate America, advertisers, and wealthy patrons. They're also disincentivized from criticizing the government, which media monopolies are dependent upon to make favorable policies or even offer subsidies. Karen argues that this leads news operations to refrain from criticizing various administrations or politicians. The supposed benefit of deregulating commercial media was what McChesney and Nichols describe as the structural independence necessary to let the press criticize the government and politicians without fear of punishment or retribution. But
fuck off. You're part of the problem. Alright, last chance. Damn. That's a red barrel I'm missing. Hold on. Fuck, fine. That was fun. Or did I get the medallion? And who cares about the shotguns? Alright, I'd say that was pretty good. Alright, I'll save once again at the Garador. Doing the Gigante fight isn't really all that bad for me. Oh, sure, I forgot one medallion. I start next chapter right in here anyway.
this video is brought to you by Raycon. When's the last time you felt rich? Was it when you greedily clutched your very first $20 bill? Or when you paid off the loans on your Jetta? Or when you treated your 5 closest friends to caviar and champagne on a sunset cruise to Belize? If it's been a minute since you checked your bank account and printed, you're not alone. These days, nobody seems to feel rich. Not even people who literally are. Late last year, a whopping 29% of millionaires reported feeling poor. Before you pour out 29% of your PBR in solidarity with those struggling plastic surgeons, it's worth asking, why do we all still feel as broke as we did over blending Blizzards and Dairy Queen? Is poverty a state of mind, a consequence of bad spending habits, or something way more complex? Let's explore in this video the real reason you feel broke. But before we get into it, I wanted to talk about this video's sponsor, Raycon. Raycon's everyday earbuds look sleek and bring high sound quality to everything I listen to, whether it's music, podcasts, or just watching TV. Plus, they're comfortable to wear, thanks to optimized gel tips that adapt to the contours of the ear. This design helps them stay put no matter what, even if you're exercising, or in my case, practicing my headbanging technique for the next heavy metal concert. Raycon's everyday earbuds offer 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life, so you can get through an entire workday
But
of
she's
calls
wearing
without
armor.
worrying they're gonna cut out. And they're the perfect choice for your summer vacation plans. I love to travel, and Raycon's noise isolation feature is essential to having a peaceful airplane experience. Never again will I be kept awake on a red-eye by swimming in meetings. And when I need to pay attention to the flight announcements or snacks and airplane pretzels, I can easily tap the toggle Raycon's awareness feature, which lets me hear what's going on without me pausing what I'm listening to. The company was co-founded by Raycon, and celebrities like Snoop Dogg and Melissa Etheridge are obsessed with Raycons. Raycon's wireless earbuds are available in a range of fun colors and patterns to fit every style, and a variety of fit options to fit every ear. Not to mention that they offer quality audio at half the price of their premium versions. And if you don't love them as much as I do, no sweat. Raycon's got you covered with their 30-day free return policy. So, click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/wisecrack for 15% off. That's buyraycon.com/wisecrack for 15% off the purchase. And now, back to the show. Note that we're looking at this through an American lens. But as always, we urge our further flung friends across the globe to let us know why their country is better at everything in the comments. Now, there's a popular conception of America as a middle-class country. Indeed, more than half of Americans consider themselves members of that 55-inch flat-screen TV, day drunk on a Carnival cruise demographic. That's in spite of the fact that 2 out of 3 of us couldn't afford a $400 emergency expense. And this is fitting, because for most of American history, the middle class has been more of a dream than a reality. The first hints of an American middle class began taking shape in the mid-19th century, with the emergence of the white-collar worker. But it wasn't really until the 1920s that a process began in which, according to scholar Lawrence R. Samuel, powerful economic, social, and political factors worked together in the United States to forge what many historians consider to be the first genuine mass middle class in history. Urbanization and industrialization kickstarted the process. Then came FDR's New Deal, which, following the trauma of the Depression, provided a modicum of financial security to all. It was then solidified in the economic boom after World War II, accompanied by the GI Bill, which, short-term, got 8 million veterans a college degree on the cheap. As the post-war economy boomed, according to Samuel, the vast majority of Americans were, or at least acted as if they were, middle class, a remarkable transformation in national identity. Note that a number of policies and norms ensured that this middle class was whiter than raisins in a potato salad. It's no coincidence that, with the blossoming of the fledgling middle class in the 1920s, consumer culture came into full swing. Higher production capacity meant there was more to sell, and the burgeoning middle class meant more people to sell it to, albeit with the substantial hiccup of the Great Depression. The phenomenon of the consumer citizen, or a person who relates to their society primarily via consumption choices, began to gain traction. In the post-war years, consumer spending would become a key symbol of the American way of life, especially for its middle class. This phenomenon was famously identified decades earlier by sociologist Thorstein Veblen, who dubbed it conspicuous consumption, or any material spending that offered to the spender elevated social status. Importantly, during the Cold War, buying toasters and microwaves also offered an attractive contrast to the evils of communism, according to Samuel. This elevated consumer spending from mere frivolity to a key element of the American character. As retail analyst Victor LeBeau remarked at the time, our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction, in consumption. Yeah, he really said that. Now, in the days of more expensive handcrafted goods, the stuff you own used to be a sign of class status. But with rampant mass production driving costs down, middle-class folks could increasingly afford the same products as wealthy people. And cosplaying at Vanderbilt turned out to be a pretty fun hang. Founder of modern marketing Edward Bernays observed of the consumer that a thing may be desired not for its intrinsic worth or usefulness, but because he has unconsciously come to see in it a symbol of social position, an evidence of his success. You could argue that Americans confirmed their middle-class status every time they checked out at Macy's. Philosopher Herbert Marcuse observed as much in
Have plenty of-
1964, writing that the people recognize themselves in their commodities. They find their soul in their automobile, hi-fi set, split-level home, kitchen equipment. Product diversification would blossom in the 70s and 80s, and as sociologist Wolfgang Streeck writes, the closer products
That
came
movie
to the
should be good.
specific preferences of consumers, the more consumers turned out to be willing to pay. And indeed, the harder they were prepared to work, and the more they were prepared to borrow for the purchasing power needed to participate in the new paradigm of economic growth. Everything from watches to wine became hyper-specialized and bougie. Marcuse similarly argued that the more we associate ourselves with what we buy, the more we're down to grind away at work to buy more of it. He called this voluntary servitude, wherein we're not actively being enslaved or forced to work. Rather, we're simply convinced that we should spend most of our time working so we can consume all the things we desire in our increasingly sparse free time. A lot of us no longer question if it's really worth giving up most of our lives to snag that beloved sound system or iron basketball jersey or bubble machine. And we often tend to assume that people who don't grind hard enough simply don't deserve to have nice stuff. Or any stuff for that matter. Or that not having nice stuff must mean your bones are fundamentally lazy.
I mean, it's what would it cost? $10?
Consumption is the central way we understand social and economic status in the US. And this was not an inevitability. As we've talked about before, you can't create a fast-paced consumer economy overnight. That shit takes work. And as the consumer economy ran at a faster clip, its overlords needed new strategies to peddle their wares. As journalist Vance Packard observed, just as immense effort was being devoted to persuading people to buy things they did not actually need, manufacturers also began the intentional design of inferior items, which came to be known as planned obsolescence. Packard identified two versions of this. First, functional obsolescence, in which a product is simply designed to wear out quickly, and second, psychological obsolescence, in which products are, as Packard puts it, designed to become obsolete in the mind of the consumer, even sooner than the components used to make them will fail. This form really blossomed in the 90s, where we saw the emergence of design fads in products that had once been timeless. Once lifelong companions, changing up your dining room chair, your overcoat, or your car became a new way to confirm your status in society. What all this means is that if you're an American watching this, your parents and grandparents were probably good little consumer boys and girls just like you. Their habits were in part facilitated by what began as metal money in 1918, gained popularity as the Chargent and Diners Club cards in the 1940s, and matured into a credit card industry that is now your favorite pen pal. But while credit cards allowed lots of people to spend more than they earned, thus injecting some precarity into the punch bowl, the middle class was hardly hanging on by a financial thread. It's no secret that a number of economic and social policies enacted since the 1960s have eroded the strong middle class of the post-war years. So, unsurprisingly, when you flash forward to today, being broke is almost an inevitability for most young people. It doesn't help that many of us came of age amidst the Great Recession, endless wars, and the rise, and yep, still rising student loan debts. Growing wealth can feel like fighting the Undertaker in a steel cage, but we don't know how that ends. Wasn't precarious enough? Interstate, right? Wage stagnation. For a long time, paychecks simply haven't kept up with increasing worker productivity, much less ever-growing inflation. As our chums at the Economic Policy Institute put it, wage stagnation for the vast majority was not created by abstract economic trends. Rather, wages were suppressed by policy choices made on behalf of those with the most income, wealth, and power. In the past few decades, the American economy generated lots of income and wealth that would have allowed substantial living standard gains for every family. Especially since the Reagan era, reigning economic policies have disempowered workers and given corporations carte blanche to go buck wild in the name of shareholder profits. And here's where we gotta talk about the invisible $5 egg in the room: inflation. While prices on healthcare, housing, and higher education have been soaring over past decades, and as noted, wages haven't even been cut to keep up, the recent surge in prices for everyday goods has a lot of us choosing between milk, eggs, bread, or discount Eastwood tickets that very reliable man on Craigslist will definitely eat up. Now, economists disagree on what's causing inflation. For his part, journalist Philip Bittman attributes it largely to greedflation, essentially a term for corporate price gouging. He writes that companies sneaking through mega price rises using the war and the pandemic as cover are stealing everyone's income. They are 21st century war profiteers and should be recognized as such. But even regardless of the cause, the way we see it, there are two undeniable things going on. Number one, simultaneous inflation and wage stagnation means most of us are losing spending power. And number two, federal efforts to stamp out inflation are hurting us even more. That's because the main tool to fight inflation, the Federal Reserve raising interest rates, is intended to suppress the economy's supposedly relentless growth. But with wages already faltering, increased interest rates simply punish the working and middle classes. As former Secretary of Labor Robert Bernard Reich explains in The Guardian, higher interest rates will slow economic growth and result in softer labor market conditions, a euphemism for lower wage increases and fewer jobs. In short, first inflation hurts our buying power, then the government's attempts to stamp out inflation hurts our wages and livelihoods. It's a double-stuffed sandwich. So amidst the double whammy of wage stagnation and inflation, are we fated to feel poor all the time, even if we just landed a new job? And how does feeling economically disempowered affect our behavior? In recent years, personal finance experts will often point to something called lifestyle creep or lifestyle inflation as a major culprit. Lifestyle creep basically describes our all-too-familiar tendency to increase our expenses and decrease our savings as we make more money. This can happen either with pay raises or with paying off debt, both of which make us feel rich. And when we feel rich, we go on shopping sprees instead of saving for retirement. Financial advisors and their ilk warn that lifestyle creep prevents us from investing in our futures, while Forbes describes it as a form of running in place. In literal terms, it manifests as more than half of folks who make over $100,000 per year living paycheck to paycheck. According to the experts, it's a matter of bad planning. We're a nation of impulse buyers, splurging on new gizmos instead of saving up for a window room and a swanky retirement home. But we think this is a case for blaming a society-wide phenomenon on individuals' bad choices kind of misses the mark. Sure, we all could be making better choices with our finances, but we don't exist in a vacuum. A huge aspect of our economy is unlimited consumer choice, which effectively means that there are products and services to match every economic demographic. I mean, you could buy, say, a pepper shaker for $5 or $20 or $200. You could go running and lift weights at home for basically free, or pay $10 to work out at Crunch, or upgrade to Equinox, or just pay a personal trainer to politely ignore the camera crew hanging out at your home gym. Once we reach a higher income level, and especially in the era of hyper-targeted digital advertising, we're immediately met with an attractive laundry list of shiny new things we can suddenly technically afford, and what's more, should pay for if we want to confirm our new class status. As we've established, the consumer citizen who over-identifies with the they own was central to the growth and maturation of America's economy. It's also created a climate where your varied class status can feel contingent on owning the right stuff. In an economy that's based on endless growth and planned obsolescence, there's only too many eager folks ready to sell whatever will make us feel like we finally made it. And in our era of commodified self-care, spending money is often even reframed as being kind to ourselves. Whether that comes in the form of Chinese takeout with $15 service fees, or a weekend in an Airbnb cabin upstate with $200 cleaning fees.
3 words for you. Treat yourself.
The reality is that the consumption required to appear middle class today makes the middle class hood of the 1950s, with its 2-car garage, 1 small TV, and 1 road trip a year, look positively frugal. Putting a record player on your charging card back in 1958 is a lot different than accumulating $20,000 of debt trying to cut it as an unpaid intern in New York City today. And the advanced consumer economy has changed more than just the stuff we need to buy to keep up with our friends. It's changed the way we conceive of our own identities. As Streak writes, commercialization has created opportunities.
In order to avoid damage, I am going to throw a flash grenade.
New type of association.
And hopefully
that
that
is
will work.
a way for individuals to link up to others and thereby define their place
Otherwise,
in the
I'm kind
world.
of screwed.
It provides a mechanism that
I
allows you
left a lot of people alive here.
purchase as an act of self-identification and self-presentation. One that sets the individual apart from some social groups while uniting him or her with others. Buying things helps us confirm our membership in whichever groups we find desirable. Opting out of conspicuous consumption
I just realized trying to get the second golden egg is so not worth it.
Yes, lifestyle creep does occur on an individual level, but it's
So, yeah,
also a reflection on the fact that a lot of aspects of life are more expensive than ever, and yet also more important than ever in protecting our class status. You need a different Oxford shirt for every day of the week to protect your status as a white-collar worker. You need to get your kids some sweet kicks to protect their status as, you know, a cool kid who doesn't deserve to be stuffed in the locker. In an age where consumption has basically become a primary means of political and social expression, is it any surprise that we all suck at saving? But what do you guys think? Why does it feel like we're never getting any closer to financial solvency? Is the problem a reflection of a messed up consumer culture? Or do we all just need to download a good budgeting app? Let us know in the comments. Thanks to our patrons for your support, and thanks to all of you for consciously consuming our videos, for liking and subscribing, and for always leaving kind, well thought out, never reactionary sentiments in the comments that we cannot wait to read. Catch you later.
Where's the heavy grenade aircraft? It's scared. What the? What the fuck was that entire sequence? There's another yellow earth coming up soon. Fuck, you know, I've never bothered to... Uh-oh. Shit, my body armor. Thank you for helping us continue to serve a just cause. I'm dead. Bruh, I got decked. First time I've seen that death animation. I got this. Yeah, this section is so damn crazy. Even this is the only part of the game I'd probably save in. Even though there's nothing that can instantly kill me. So,
I mostly watch this off because I love Zelda and love talking about it. Also, it looks more weird than the victory screen version. It almost seems like he's going sideways back and forth rather than starting upwards, but I think that's just the camera angle making it look different, and that his movements actually are him doing the upwards motion at the start. Alright, let's talk about Wolf now. First up, a prompt mentions how, for early game footage, there's a few inconsistencies with what his in-game model looks like, compared to the model used in his official render. I'll just list them all off. In this part of the trailer, the soles of his boots are red, but are blue in the official render and finished game, as well as other parts of the trailers. And the straps behind his right shin guards were white, even though they're all black in this render. And in some places, his jacket and gloves are a much darker purple than they are now.
How is this possible?
How lighting is stuff ineffective, but I think I see it. And these inconsistencies can be found in other character trailers like Fox's, or Mewtwo's, or Corrin's, and so on. Though it's not in all of the trailers, like we can see with Toon Link's where his boots are generally fine. And we can even see some of these inconsistencies in some of his character page screenshots on the official site. Like right here, you can clearly see the red boot soles. And you can very faintly point out the white straps here, and so on and so on. Also, there's a prompt that points out how his render having black straps is also wrong compared to the current in-game version, where his shin guard straps are now the same purple as his jacket and gloves. Now, you might be wondering, like, why does Wolf have so many inconsistencies throughout his appearance in trailers and whatnot? Like, inconsistencies aren't unheard of for other characters. We've gone up quite a few on the channel and one for Toon Link earlier today. But Wolf feels like he has just a lot more. Like they kept fine-tuning him throughout the development more than other characters. Well, funny enough, the wiki also mentions that, while Wolf's design here is based on his appearance in Star Fox Zero, the outfit is almost entirely original. This is most likely because the only times Wolf has ever appeared in Star Fox Zero was through an in-game headshot when he's speaking. You know, the whole Zoom meeting call perspective, where Wolf easily could have been in his undies here and no one would have been any the wiser. Unfortunately, they didn't go with the underwear idea, but considering they had to make it from scratch, it makes a lot of sense that there were being this many changes throughout development relative to other characters, which I think is pretty interesting to know. And we got a lot more Wolf content to talk about, with next being how the visual effects for all his claw-based attacks show only 3 slash trails, even though Wolf is actually attacking with 4 fingers. I mean, sometimes it's hard to tell if he's supposed to be using his thumb in the attack or not, but we can definitely tell he's meant to be using his 4 main fingers. Yeah, that's more of a nitpick than anything else, but hey, nitpicks count as trivia if you haven't picked up on that right now. Next, it's mentioned how for this version of Wolf, if you look under his eye patch, which I did from Zach Fox, thank you very much, you can see that it looks like his eyelid is closed. I say looks like, in reality it's just the eye but with no actual texture, so it just uses the body texture firstly, which I guess ends up appearing like an eyelid, but probably isn't. This is contrary to what the wiki says, that the eye is in the socket, which it really isn't, but it is still kind of lame, I guess. However, for the raw version, looking through his cybernetic eye patch shows he actually has a fully functional eye. Apparently something similar happens in Star Fox Assault when you try to look under Wolf's eye patch there. Not sure if that's an intentional reference or just a coincidence, but it's pretty funny. Again, I would like to thank Zach Fox for getting those model images for me, linked to their Twitter in the description. Oh, and also speaking of Zach Fox, they have pointed out how apparently the last hit of Wolf's jab in his trailer looked way different than the current version. Mostly the positioning of the head and the body, which I did notice. So there's another inconsistency to add to the growing pile. Next, when Wolf does his forward rolling tech, his ankle gets a little bit messed up. As you can see here, it's facing the complete wrong way. It ends up being fixed by the time the animation is over, obviously, but man, looking at the whole thing, it seems to start once Wolf first gets
Why do these guys have such great finding?
Never loving hell out of it.
Maybe they're using echolocation to help them.
Oh, and apparently this isn't just found in the forward tech, but can also be found in his victory screen animation where he does a roundhouse kick at the end. It's not the leg kicking that gets broken, but the one standing. And it only happens for 1 frame right here, before it goes back to normal. I think this one is hysterical. It just looks at you for a single frame. I don't know, I don't even know why that happens, but that's super funny. Speaking of Wolf disfiguring himself, it's mentioned how he'll look a bit weird if you walk off a platform or ledge with his left foot, as the leading move is primarily the left arm that gets a bit messed up.
This one's a bit harder to pinpoint than the last examples, but you can see it's kinda weird looking, and then just suddenly snaps back into position in one frame after a bit of time. And this doesn't seem to happen if he walks off the ledge with his right foot. You know, I doubt Wolf is the only one with plenty of weird animation quirks like these, but he certainly has a lot of them written down on this wiki, so hey, I'll talk about it. Lastly for Wolf, it's mentioned how his blaster will have a different effect played out if Fox is in the match. Normally the effect of a successful hit with the blaster just sort of looks like this, loads of electric effects and whatnot. This is true for hitting a player, an item, or a wall. However, if Fox is in the match, then this hit effect will have some black smoke appear as well. Again, be it hitting a player, an item, or just a wall. This is because Fox's laser itself always has this black smoke effect appear upon successful hits, so my guess is that Wolf's is meant to have this appear normally, but some code spaghetti means that it can only load it in when Fox is around too. Or maybe it was never meant to be there for Wolf, but again, code spaghetti happens. And in case you're wondering, no, this does not happen for Falco's laser. His stays without any smoke, for some mandatory testing. If Fox loses his last stock in a team battle, the black smoke effect will still be loaded for Wolf, because Fox is still loaded. On the flip side, if Fox gets KO'd in Squad Strike, he gets unloaded, meaning while the black smoke was there before, it goes away alongside Fox. These types of effects are always really interesting to me, since not only do I gotta wonder what exactly is going on that makes it happen, but also this has been known since, like, when the game first came out. Like, I definitely remember hearing about it within the first year of the game's release, yet they've never touched it. I'm actually kinda glad though, that's more content for me. And that's the Brawl Veterans all finished up. But since we still got time, I'll touch on some of these Smash 4 folk. Starting with the Villager.
That was good
It's
enough.
mentioned how characters
I
are
used
being
up
grabbed
pretty
by
much
the
every
net,
healing that I
have
had,
their models
but-
change in order to fit inside, which looks a little bit terrifying. This is similar to how characters have their heads shrunk considerably when inside of Wario's mouth. And yes, this is hysterical. And also, I believe I didn't go over this in the video where I covered Wario in this series. I guess it just wasn't on the wiki or anything, so here it is here. Villagers is a bit different though, since it's not an all-encompassing effect. If the character is already small enough to fit inside the net, like, surprisingly, Wario is, their model will look fine when you zoom in. This doesn't happen for Wario's bite, since I imagine no one's head is small enough to naturally fit inside of it from my tests. That's also surprising, but I guess they're being safe and sorry here with the animations. So like here, for Mario, his model is all intact for the net, but for DK, he's been halved. And yeah, this is how it works for Isabelle too. Also, I did notice it with Ridley since he's kind of just a blob of messed up purple, but with DK, you can especially see that the model isn't like cut in half or anything, but rather the top half is just shrunk down to incredible amounts, which is actually way funnier. Strangely enough, I found that if I do the frame-by-frame thing while zoomed into the net, the character will return to their normal size, and when you zoom out, you can see them flipping out of the net, which is not normal. But when you advance frames outside of the net, that clipping disappears, and we can see that they return to being proven to oblivion. So I guess they just don't want the frame-by-frame mode thing to see the character all shrunk up. It's really interesting. And lastly for today's video is Mega Man, who has a piece of trivia mentioning that he can actually walk with the assist trophy in his hand. This is done if you're using his walking neutral attack, which I guess is technically his side tilt, and you pick it up while doing this. This is because, you know, his neutral can be used while walking, which I guess gives it different properties. Once you stop walking, you'll just use the assist trophy as normal. But you can jump like this. Normally when you land, again you'll just use the assist trophy. But if you land while using his neutral air, which is once again the same as his neutral attack and walking variants, then he can land while still holding the assist trophy. And you might notice that you can't really turn around like this, but what you could do is just jump and use some special attack, up special being the best, to turn around. So long as you land using his neutral air, it'll work, which is actually a super safe attack, I think. Mega Man is one of 3 characters who can do this. The others being Min-Min, whose jabs are basically just a normal neutral attack. You know, Min-Min is just super unique in that regard. And Steve, who can walk with his neutral attack as well. I found this to be super easy with Min-Min, like the movement was way more forgiving and even allowed you to turn around easily. Whereas I felt Steve was the harder of the bunch to control. It wasn't impossible to do the things I went over before, but it did feel less forgiving. Still pretty cool though. First off, it's mentioned how in the World of Light opening cutscene, you know how there's a bunch of characters doing their best to escape from the beams of doom? Link tries using his overpowered Hylian shield that apparently did work in blocking off the light beams. I guess they kept the effectiveness of it true from the game. The Inklings try to hide in their ink. Snake prays. Now when it gets to this part, you might notice that while Villager and Duck Hunt are just sort of panicking, with the duck trying to carry the dog away, which I thought was funny. You've then got Wii Fit Trainer here just doing a stretch. While this could certainly just be a goofy last-minute exercise, as the wiki points out, it's more likely that this is a reference to how her up smash, the tree yoga pose that you see in the trailer, actually has a few frames of intangibility. To be specific, she has 4 frames, which really isn't a lot. And looking here, we can tell that she was a bit early in the input. I mean, I don't know, she is pretty close, but I guess it just didn't work. She would have been better off just spot dodging, but oh well. It's one of those things where I guess I can see it being intentional, but the effect of up smash's 4-frame intangibility isn't really what that the move is known for, so it could go either way. The wiki had also brought up how her final smash starts with the tree yoga pose too, so perhaps she was trying to unleash that. There's no way to tell for sure, but it's a funny thought to snack on for a bit. Next, it's mentioned how Wii Fit Trainer's attacks don't have any sort of motion trail visual effects. Now, what I assume this refers to is the sort of trailing effect that usually accompanies an attack, like we can see here. It follows the source of the attack, in this case Mario's fist, likely to make it pop out more, even if it's only subtle, like right here. Characters usually have it stylized to them in some way, but regardless, I think it just refers to the general idea of some visual effect that makes the source of an attack stand out more. And yeah, Wii Fit Trainer does not have any of that. She's got the dust clouds that appear by her feet to give it some weight, but that's it. It's presumed that this decision was made because it puts much more focus on the yoga poses that make up her moveset, which I can definitely see. Surprisingly, I never noticed this before, but I do think it's really neat. Apparently the only other character with this trait is Mr. Game & Watch, which makes more sense since the lack of special visual effects plays into this out-of-place retro vibe. And neither of these lack of effects ever feel weird since they, have the damage effects play out still. So everything that's important is still there. But it's pretty cool to think about those visual effects. These are the things I don't usually think about or really look at, so I think it's cool. Next, the prompt mentions how the male and female variants of Wii Fit Trainer actually have different animations from one another, rather than just being nearly carbon copies, which I didn't know about before. This primarily refers to the animation they make when they're getting hit by an extremely weak move, like Joker's gun here. The difference is pretty obvious to tell. Apparently the reason why is a difference, which is why I made him bring it up, is that while the female Wii Fit Trainer has received new hit-stun animations, the male Wii Fit Trainer simply reuses his hit-stun animations for the Smash 4, which is why there's a disparity between the two. It was hard for me to notice for other bigger attacks since there's a lot going on, but the best way to visualize it is through Joker's final smash. The first hit already shows a big difference in how they look, and after all is said and done, there's some subtle differences between their final pose too. It's hard to say if this was intentional or not, but given the idea that only the male version has apparently not been given updated animations, and I can see it being a mistake, but it's hard to say. And lastly for Wii Fit Trainer, it's mentioned how they're one of the only characters in the game who has lowercase letters in their name, the only other ones being the 3 B's. Funny enough, for all of them, it's the I that's lowercase. Of course, when you actually hover over a character, everyone has their name spelled out properly in lowercase, but this prompt is referring to the text that appears on the character in the selection area itself, which is also how it appears at the start of the match and at the end of it. Only Wii Fit V's keep their lowercase letters in all of these scenarios. And in the case of V's, the name of the V will stick around during the match's start, which also adds more potential lowercase letters to the mix, which I think is neat. Now, moving on to Rosalina. It's mentioned how in the video on their official site, a visual glitch can be seen when she uses her digital hair, where her dress goes really high up and reveals her legs, completely disjointed from her body and not fully modeled. I mean, it lasts like 1 or 2 frames, but it's kind of hysterical. Unfortunately, this is not in the game any longer, as you can imagine, but it's pretty crazy to see that in the trailer footage. Similarly, it's mentioned how in the trailer, Rosalina's final smash is shown to be a power star, which resembles what it was in Smash 4. However, in the finished game, the final smash is now the Grand Star. And this change is echoed in her move list too. And it overall makes sense. The Power Star was just the baby version of the Mario Galaxy, but the Grand Star was the big important one that you get at the end of each world, or not world, but like section, yeah. So it's a much better fit. Moving on, it's mentioned how for most characters' victory screens, the announcer will say something like, with the S at the end of wins. That's what makes sense in Mario wins. However, as the wiki states, for Rosalina and Luma, they actually dropped the S, as that wouldn't fit when referring to two subjects, which they are. Fittingly, this happens for Ice Climbers and Banjo Singing too. Ice Climbers! I've been showing you all of the examples just so you can get a good idea of what they sound like. For those of you especially perceptive, you might have noticed a few things.
Why?
First, that this victory announcement is really just a combination of the announcer's voice line from that character, like on the character selection screen, and the word wins, or win, added on separately. Which makes sense. But the big thing is the lines for wins and win. You might notice that when he says wins, it's more of a flat tone throughout all of the cases. When he says win with no S, it's a lot more energetic. Yeah, this is neat, but why point it out? Well, I mean, it's pretty interesting in itself, but it also gives us a pretty good idea that they simply carried over this win voice line from what the announcer always says in the Japanese version. That's right, for the Japanese version, they never seem to say wins. They always just use that more energetic win line for every character. So yeah, even for the characters who are just, singular. I find this extremely interesting. Obviously we know that it's technically grammatically incorrect to say it that way, yet while they tidied that up for the English version, they kept it like this for the Japanese version despite all the other similarities. That's not a critique necessarily, I just think it's really interesting to point out. There's actually a lot of things that I wanted to point out when changing the game language to Japanese, but like I said in the past, I think I'll save that for a dedicated video specifically.
You even had one left over. Yeah, 30 power hand cannon.
Which can even
Very
be a whole
good.
series rather than just one video based on what I
The other magnums are still technically
Speaking of
stronger, but
Japanese, the wiki points out how normally
you can't
the voice
deny
text
how useful
in
infinite
the
ammo
Japanese version, people
without
have their
cat
names
ears
written out
is.
in their proper kanji or kana forms, if applicable. So people like Charles Martinet are just written out in their normal romaji forms, but for mostly everyone else, their names are written in their proper Japanese forms. However, for Rosalina and Luma, specifically Luma, the voice actor is actually a Japanese person named Yuya Takezawa, and yet their name is spelled out using romaji for some reason. I looked all throughout the sound test, and this was the only example I could stumble upon, too.
Beat chapter
If you're
11
curious, this is
quickly.
what the kanji for the name
I'm
looks
running
like.
out of time.
And it's also weird because not only is this just the romaji version of his name,
gotta pee.
but it's also way that Japanese people organize their names. Since in Japanese they do the last name first and the first name last. So the kanji here says Takezawa Yuya rather than Yuya Takezawa, you know. So this is strange and is most likely an oversight. Moving on from Rosalina and Luma, for Little Mac, first is mentioned how apparently his classic mode has a high spawn rate of these sandbag. I don't feel like I have to really explain this one. It's just a nice touch. And lastly, for him, it's mentioned that his entrance animation has a few new inconsistencies.
Oh, I didn't mean to save right
for
there.
When he enters facing
Whatever.
left, you notice that he has his back to the camera, but when he takes his hoodie off, he very suddenly turns to the right position. And the other is, for his wireframe alt, he comes in wearing a green hoodie, but when he takes it off, that hoodie turns into a pink one in the animation. And I'm pretty sure this one has been known about for a very long time, but I guess I just never bothered fixing it. Let's move on to our last character today, Greninja. First, the wiki points out how, in the Pokemon series, Ash Greninja, the special form of Greninja from the anime or whatever, is canonically a male Greninja. And as far as we know, this is the only time we see Greninja in this kind of appearance. So the fact that Greninja turns into Ash Greninja for his final smash implies that this version of Greninja is also male. Or rather, that is just Ash's Greninja having fun in Smash or something. I think that's what the implication is. I'm not sure if there are any other instances of this appearance of Greninja outside of, you know, Ash's Greninja, or like what the lore is. So yeah, because of that, I'm not sure how much stock there is in that theory, but I can definitely see it making sense, which is cool. It wouldn't be the first time a Pokemon's gender is confirmed, like with Pikachu and how the last two alts are female due to the heart shape of its tail. Speaking of lore accuracy, the wiki also points out a funny coincidence regarding Greninja's weight. That is, Greninja's average weight in the Pokemon universe is 88.2 pounds. And funny enough, his weight in Smash is 88, exactly. Obviously, that's just a funny coincidence. I mean, there's no way in any universe that everyone's weights are accurate to their normal characters. I mean, just look at this. And also given the fact that the rest of the world uses kilograms for weight, so I doubt that they would use pounds to tackle weight accuracy anyways. But it's still funny, right? We're all having a laugh? Alright, cool. Lastly for today's video, as mentioned how normal counters won't actually work against Greninja's taunt attack, despite it having a hitbox. This isn't a thing with taunt attacks overall, as the other ones can be countered just fine. It's just for Greninja. And yes, this is the case for a wide variety of the standard counter type. And if you look closely, you can see that it's almost like the attack is hitting during the counter, and it's just not doing anything. So it's clearly something funky. And yeah, it is. See, Greninja's down taunt has two properties. The grounded property, which is a standard hitbox,
I'm gonna try rushing here. I can take risks.
Property, which is a windbox. And that's what keeps you afloat, and its effect can be very noticeable if
Since,
you jump out of it from being
I
hit.
made a save.
So basically, there's a standard
A terrible
hitbox and a
save,
windbox
but
being tied together here. The running theory is that the counter responds to both the standard hitbox and the windbox at the same time. Any properties of the windbox simply take over. Since counters cannot be triggered by a windbox, they won't get triggered here, but the counters can negate the windbox, which you can visualize using the gust jar. Wait, I think it's dust. For the moments the counter is out, they don't move anywhere.
No!
It doesn't pass them. Dust is just negated. So this may be why we see an effect as if you're hitting the counter despite nothing being triggered, because it just keeps getting negated over and over again. This is important to note because there are a few exceptions, one being Bayonetta, whose witch time works just fine, and there's Joker, whose Rebel's Guard still functions.
I think I
the
can
main
do it.
reason why these are exceptions is because of
I
how
just
they
need a
normally
flashbang.
interact with windboxes. Bayonetta simply ignores them. She doesn't negate them, which can be seen by how the wind pushes past her for the brief period she avoids it. And for Joker, he gets pushed around by the windbox, meaning it's not really negated at all. So overall, pretty interesting. This is surely a massive buff to Greninja's down taunt attack. First off with Palutena, it's mentioned how for her directional air dodges, she doesn't actually disappear for them like she does for her neutral air dodge or her rolls. Yet despite this, the directional air dodge still uses the disappearing sound effect. This is one I contemplated on for a bit, since it's not necessarily like there's a universal teleporting sound effect, which we can see or hear with Mewtwo's own teleporting air dodges, which have their own flavor. But I don't know, the sound here for Palutena is kind of similar to the sound it makes when she uses her Up Me teleport. So I can see that connection being their intention, and just overlook that for her non-teleporting directional air dodges, but I'll let you be the judge of that. Also, the same is true for Rosalina and Luma, both with the normal teleporting moves sharing the sound of her non-teleporting ones. And Greninja was also brought up, but this one I'm less sure about. See, the sound effect of the air dodges are different from his roll. And his neutral air dodge is hardly disappearing. Well, okay, I mean, it is technically disappearing, but it doesn't really last that long. And you might not even notice it on your own, since it occurs for like 6 frames. So I'm not really sure why Greninja was included, but I mean, I guess there you go. Anyways, next, the wiki points out a really interesting bit of development trivia for the game, where Sakurai actually has gone on record saying that, at some point, they had considered characters like Palutena, as well as Bayonetta, for being the sole survivors of Galen's big onslaught, rather than Kirby. I guess it had come up from considering things from a lore perspective, since Palutena is a literal goddess. And Bayonetta has, as far as I can tell, killed a handful of gods, but I'm not sure if that's the only reasoning since there's plenty of other god slayers. I think it might have to do with her being able to go to other dimensions, maybe. But ultimately, I guess they felt it was inconsistent since plenty of other fellow gods and goddesses were turned into spirits, as were Bayonetta's enemies from Hell, or I guess Purgatorio as it's called in the games. I'm sorry, I've never played the series, I'm just using context clues here. So I mean, that's the more in-universe type logic for that choice, though I'm sure you can make plenty of arguments for or against that decision, and for or against them selling on Kirby, using game lore and whatnot. But honestly, that sounds like kind of a handful, and I'm not very interested in that. But really, the most important thing to consider is how the one who survives ends up being the first character to play as. It essentially ends up being a soft mascot of sorts of the game, a kind of a tutorial character almost. And Sakurai said that Palutena and Bayonetta had controls that were far too complex for such a starting role, which I do agree with. And the fact of the matter is that neither Palutena nor Bayonetta really feel like Smash mascots, if you're asking me. So I do think Kirby was the best choice in the end. It's really interesting to think about an alternate universe where something like Palutena ended up
Bad idea.
Also, in the final game, apparently Bayonetta and Palutena are unlocked very close to the end of the game on the final battle map, which could imply that we knew of how much of a threat these two were. Which I guess kind of echoes that whole planning stage, which I think is fun.
Don't let your greed control your
Japanese, the title for World of Light spelled backwards is the title for the Kirby series. Well, looking at it in Romaji, it doesn't make sense. But of course, you gotta remember that the Japanese language uses kana and kanji, which individually contain multiple quote-unquote letters in one thing. So when you write it backwards with the kanji for fire here can be pronounced as just ka. And this one is still mi. So, Hoshi no Kabi. Or I guess it's just Hoshi no Kabi, there's no elongation, but whatever. This is basically what the Kirby series is called in Japanese. And yeah, it's a lot more of a mouthful to explain outside of a Japanese setting, isn't it? I mean, there's kind of a lot going, but basically it's definitely possible to get to that conclusion. I mean, obviously, since Sakurai himself was the one who brought it up, which I think is really funny. It's also funny because this wasn't necessarily intentional, which you can kind of assume through a few ways, but it is something he knows through development. Though he didn't want this to be a Kirby game necessarily, just a game where you start out as Kirby, and then move on to wherever you want to as you collect more playable characters. Anyways, finally moving on to Pac-Man. First, let's mention how his stock icon is one of the few in the game that does not depict his head. Instead, we get his body, I guess? I mean, would this be his head? I guess not. It's the classic Pac-Man symbol.
At least I will be getting him more.
Yeah, it's his body, or whatever. So yeah, it shares this with, say, the bees, who just have their weapon of choice used as the icon. Which makes more sense given the vast diversity that a bee can come in.
That those only drop if you have less than 10.
I think it's kind of neat to just take the time to look at stock icons. Because when I first saw this, I kind of thought, wait, how do they differentiate between alts again?
Really
and the answer is that for all the non-default alts, they incorporate a little line at the bottom, which is color-coded to vaguely represent the new alt. I mean, Pac-Man's alts are hardly anything unique anyways, so I guess just depicting this sleeve color in this manner just makes sense. I guess I never really noticed this before though, so that's kind of cool. Next, let's mention how in Pac-Man's trailer footage, he has a few inconsistencies going on. First, it points out how Pac-Man showed water coming out of his hydrant, which clashes with it and thus removes it. This feature is not present in the final game, as the water cannot be clashed with. I mean, this was done to make it more effective against opponents, but for the Pac-Man himself, it could have been a nice way to negate the water that's coming towards him, making it easier to get close to the hydrant and not get shoved around, but that's not how it ended up. And the other one is how, after Ike hits his trampoline, it turns green, which is different from how it turns red now. Or actually, the color it turns depends on the power of the attack, and it just goes through the trampoline's color cycle. To me, it feels like the original idea was that attacking the trampoline just always puts it in the green colored state, and the other color stages were still present. You can see as when Ike gets knocked into the trampoline, you briefly see it turn red before it gets put in green. I guess in the final game they just decided to keep it simple, just have attacking and change its normal color stages. Next is mention how in Pac-Man's classic mode, it features the only round in the entire game to not include any background music. That being this Duck Hunt match
How
right
did
here.
you get here so fast? Well, I'm not complaining.
Yes, I have background music on for this test. You can tell there's no music because at the beginning of the match, no music title is shown up in the top left corner of the screen, like is done for every other round. If I had to guess why that's the case, it's because Pac-Man's rounds tended to use more of the retro-sounding music, as we can hear here. And I guess there's just not a true-to-form retro-sounding Duck Hunt song, because, well, I guess Duck Hunt didn't really have any music, did it, outside the opening jingle. So all we've got in Smash are remixes, which I guess just doesn't match the vibe. Now, I'm no expert on classic mode, I rarely ever bother to play these things anymore. So there may be nuances and other exceptions, but I still think that's pretty interesting. Just the complete silence going on in this Smash. I mean, the stage itself has sound effects, so it's not really silent. I guess it's just kind of the retro equivalent of environmental noises. Next, the wiki brings up a little visual glitch that's still in the game, where if the round ends with Pac-Man still using his Final Smash, and it cuts to this certain victory screen animation, you see that Pac-Man is not there. It just appears out of nowhere. This is what the animation is supposed to look like for reference. This isn't very new, so I won't go too into it, but you can make the assumption that, for some reason, the 2D sprite thing in his Final Smash messes with the same 2D sprite loading in his victory animation. Oh, and speaking of Pac-Man's Final Smash, it's also mentioned how when he activates it, he does the animation where he sorta eats something, but he doesn't have anything that he's actually eating. In Smash 4, his Final Smash had to beat a super villain or whatever, which is what made him all big and stuff. But I guess they changed their minds on how Pac-Man activates his Final Smash for this game, so there's no power coming from any kind here. And yet Pac-Man still makes a clear eating motion. I mean, there's a lot of lights in here, so maybe there's something in there that's eating, but I don't know, I still don't think it really looks right. He's just kind of eating air. And that's it for Pac-Man. The wiki points out how its forward air deals exactly 7.65%, which is supposedly an Easter egg, since if you take 765 and
They
some
walk
Japanese
faster
number
than us.
magic to it, we can get none.
And you can't parry those, as far as I'm aware.
No idea if this is actually an Easter egg or just a coincidence, but yeah. Also, this is of course measuring it with base damage values, that being a full pop aerial in a non-1v1 setting with no scaling, as the 1v1 damage boost and the short hop damage decrease and scaling are all multipliers added onto the base value. And since I'm already over-explaining things, we can confirm with some reasonable confidence that this damage does 7.65% exactly, as if you use it 10 times in a row, no scaling, you get exactly 76.5%. Yes, I could have just asked someone to open the game to confirm that for me, but that's too easy. Anyways, moving on to our last character, Robin. First, the wiki brings up a recently discovered oversight with Robin involving tripping. Let's use a usually guaranteed form of tripping, like Kazuya's stature smash. So yeah, normally this move always trips his opponents, assuming you know they're grounded, but if Robin uses Thoron at any point during that life, it now becomes impossible to trip. And I performed several tests, both with how many times I used Thoron, using the other electric-based spells, using other spells in general, and ultimately, what's happening here is that if you use Thoron once at all, even if it gets interrupted, Robin gets put in this odd state where he cannot be tripped, as fast and as long as his stop does. So, you know, once he gets KO'd, his trippability is refreshed.
Well, that's about as well as I could have hoped for.
To get this to happen once again. And as you can expect, this also works for moves that have a chance to trip, like DK's down tilt for example, which makes the effect pretty widespread. Like, I'm not too caught up on the meta, I'm not sure how influential tripping is for some characters, guaranteed or not, but this seems like a pretty major oversight that, I think, really affects some characters' abilities to perform combos. I imagine Kazuya being the most affected, but you know. There are exceptions to this, of course. Some good examples would be the banana peel, which is good news for Diddy Kong since that's like pretty important for him. And there's also Wario's uncharged waft, which is also super crazy important for him, I think. Then you might ask, why are these exceptions if moves like Kazuya's Dagger Smash don't work, despite normally being a 100% trip chance? That's because these two moves don't necessarily trip, but rather use what is called the slip effect. The way I understand it is that the slip effect just sort of forces a trip, rather than working with any percentage chances. It's still kind of hard to explain too much because I don't really know why Thoron causes Robin to avoid all normal trip effects anyways, regardless of the success rate, but I guess the slip effect is still able to override that. Also, I just kind of want to briefly mention that this was pretty recently shown off, at least as far as I've seen, and I first saw it on Twitter by Archmage about a month ago,
back from
which the
to
wiki
where
actually
we
cites as evidence for that.
last
At some point I was going to use this for a random facts video, but since it made its way onto the wiki, I figured I might as well cover it here.
Still no
But I still wanted to
Alexander.
sort of give
Used
credit
to
to
have
the
another
source
red
like I
barrel.
normally do.
I'm
Oh,
not
there's an
even
interesting
willing to
test
part
on
with
top of this. What about Kirby? Since he can also use Thoron. And if Kirby uses Thoron through his copy ability, he too will attain the same weird trip immunity. And the same rules apply, where it goes away after he loses his stock. Additionally, the effect sticks around even if you cancel out the copy ability. It seems that merely using Thoron once in a life is what causes it to stick around, which I find incredibly interesting and potentially viable for Robin. So if you're ever up against Kazuya, be sure to counterpick Robin for him.
I don't mind
That's-
doing the
that's
beginning
big takeaway
section.
from this video.
Some like
Next,
to
let's mention
do
how
the
both Robin's thigh armor
apparently
and
it's good to
leg
save in
warmers
the
on his
middle
boots
as well.
completely vanish when looked at from the inside, which we can see here and here. And this is the case for both genders. It's been a while since we've gone over this type of modeling thing, so I decided to bring it up here. But you know, that's just kind of it. And lastly for today's video, it's mentioned how in the sound test, some characters with male and female alternate costumes have two identical announcer voice clips. These exist as placeholders to accommodate for languages with gendered nouns, or just any other gender difference. For example, in Spanish with the Inklings. But for some reason, Robin has two announcer voice clips as well. Robin! Despite their name being the same between genders for every language in the game, meaning there's no reason for a placeholder duplicate. And yes, I tested every single language. The announcer voice line was the same for each gender in every one. This is interesting because Corn and Violet also have gendered alts with the same announcer voice line, just like Robin. Yet their voice test lines aren't duplicated in Robin's, meaning that issue is exclusive to them. Also in this testing I found that in all of the Asian languages, Korean, both Chinese versions, and Japanese, they actually spelled Violet differently between genders. The announcer voice line is pronounced the same way in all cases, so this doesn't change the previous thing I talked about. I just thought it's pretty neat to point out. I have no experience in the other languages, but looking at the Japanese version, I can tell that it goes from minute to minutes, with the total super being different. Technically, this difference is just two ways to approach pronouncing the TH sound in English, which is why the announcer voice line stays the same. I did a little research, and it seems they may have created that differentiation because the total ending sounds more masculine and the sub sounding sounds more feminine, but the name itself still references the same thing in demonology. So I imagine that these other languages follow
It's an auto-scroller, so this
which I
is
think is super interesting.
a section of the game where I can't go faster or slower, no matter what I do.
When used if the game is slowed down. This is referring to the training mode slowdown in particular. Keeping a controlled environment, the normal Final Smash normally hits around 7 times, dealing a total of 32.4%. There's a lot of factors that decide how effective this Final Smash is, which is partially the reason why it's not really seen as that good. But if we use it in just 2/3 time, just a tiny bit slower, we can see that Lemmy gets hit far more often. The damage dealt in each individual hit seems to be the same, but I guess when the game is slowed down, the interval from which you get hit gets decreased dramatically. which not only means more damage overall, but it also means they're less likely to fall out of the final smash, which is probably one of the biggest hindrances beforehand. And yes, I am trying to escape from it here, but my inputs are just not working. It wasn't quite as effective in the half speed, since the final hit ends up missing, but the frequency of hits was still higher, and in the fourth speed it was still super effective like before. Unfortunately, this power boost doesn't seem to occur when you use the final smash under the effects of a timer, since using the final smash essentially gets rid of that slowdown. But you could play in the special smash with the slow speed active, and this does seem to keep the same more efficient hit rate. This is technically the half speed value, so it wasn't as effective when used with the idle spawning points, just like in training mode, but I'm sure with the adjustment of a few factors it could hit just fine. All that matters is that the prompt here works somewhat. So I bet the special slow smash meta is going to start feeling waves after this. Next in the sound test, Bowser Jr. and the Cripplings all have 28 voice clips. Everyone except for Larry, who's one short. The wiki says it's because his jump sound and his carry sound share the same audio file, but I'm not sure if I hear it. Not sure if I'm doing anything wrong here, but these are definitely not the same. So, just in case, I did some testing just to see, and I think it's possible that what's being shared is the text sound and the carry sound. Because for Bowser Jr., these sounds are different. But for Larry, they're the same.
I'm not gonna take that real soon.
I mean, I didn't test it too extensively. All I know is that Larry is one shy, which is pretty funny. Next, normally for Bowser Jr.'s right, you put a big rescreen, which has him pop out of the clown car. After the splash screen is played out, and the animation loops indefinitely, you can see the propeller keep spinning, because, of course it would. However, for every single one of the Koopalings, during this post-animation, the propeller actually stops after one cycle. And this is the case for every single one of them. Well, except for Roy. His loops just fine. I guess he's just built different from the others. Which, I mean, is true. Roy's one of the coolest Koopalings. I still think I like Ludwig better, but it's a close contest. Also, in writing this script, I had to change the wording a lot because I totally forgot that the Koopalings does not also refer to Bowser Jr. I mean, it'd be way easier to just refer to all 8 of these costume variants as just the Koopalings, but I guess to be more accurate, I have to keep calling them Bowser Jr. the Koopalings, even though that's a bit more of a mouthful. Anyways, lastly for Bowser Jr. and the Koopalings, we've got a few errors in the promotional trailer, so let's go over these ones in the Everyone is Here trailer. First, if you look closely at
firing rate of your Red Knight is actually pretty dang amazing.
Whoops, that's not right. And then, after Lenny uses his downtime here, you'll clearly see that his face disappears. That goofball Lemmy always removing his face. What a joker. It's mentioned how for their entrance animation, there's an error that occurs when they come in facing the left side. The smooth that appears to make the grass go away actually renders behind the grass, rather than in front of the comic show. And that is wacky. First being that he's the only character in the game who has a voice line for when you grab releases someone. Now, okay, bear with this rant for a little bit, please. But I had to listen to this a few times because at first I thought he was saying something like, what? But I think that's just because I was hearing it from a very quiet TV. I mean, I could still hear either what or whoops depending on which one I focus on. I'm not trying to claim that he might be saying what, he's definitely saying just whoops, and everyone I asked about this only heard whoops anyways, but it's just kind of funny that I can sometimes hear what depending on which word I lean towards. I know, it's possible he's also saying yanny or moral. In Japanese, he says yarana, which means, like, you're good, or something like that. Which I kind of like more, but it's interesting how this difference sort of recontextualizes a grab release. Like when he says oops, it's more like he's made a mistake by letting them get released, whereas when he says you're good, it implies that the opponent is the one who got themselves released or something. Not that there's grab release lore. And next is something that we have gone over on the channel a long time ago now, where in the game's coding, the attacks where Ken uses his legs or feet can be coded as fist attacks instead. And it's actually pretty easy for you to visualize yourself. Just make a spirit set with identical power numbers, the only difference being whether it's got fist attack up or feet attack up. Whichever move deals more damage between the two has that spirit's respective effect. For his focus attack, with the fist up spear it deals
What?
46%, and with the
I was
short
holding
spear
down
it deals
red
less at 37%.
gun button for quite a
So
while
this is
there,
clearly
so-
coded to be his fist. And the other example I found was Naka Toshigeki,
hell
one
is
of his
that
input
bullshit?
moves, which also did more damage with the
Die.
fist spear than the foot one. You can very easily assume that this is just an oversight from when they carried over Ryu's attributes going into canon. But this is an all-encompassing improvement, as moves like, say, his up air, which is a punch for Ryu and a kick for Ken, are properly coded as feat hitboxes, and are thus boosted and powered by the respective spirit. Next up is Cloud, where a prompt mentions that the Rumble controller effect doesn't work properly for his up smash. That being that it just doesn't rumble for these sweet spot hits. So
Seriously,
basically,
what the heck?
I don't really know how to show this. Okay, you guys are just gonna have to trust me on this one, okay? I tried it out for myself, and there's a lot of rumbling beforehand with the charge effect. But then when you let go, it all just disappears, which is contrary to basically every other move he uses. When it lands, there's a little bit of a rumble effect. Like, this is the case for even pummeling, and yet when you land the up smash, there's nothing. But it's especially strange when you see, or feel, that the rumble is in full effect for the sour spot of his up smash. So yeah, the controller has more of a reaction when hitting the weaker portion of the move. So obviously I have to imagine that this is some kind of oversight. Which I don't really blame because I never use the rumble feature anyways, since I don't play with my Joy-Cons, and I don't think it works for like any other controller. Could be wrong about that, but I'm not sure. For Corrin, it's briefly mentioned how she's the only character to not have her default appearance on the classic mode girl, using her female alt instead of the male alt. But you can tell that I'm using female pronouns for her anyways, and that's because the female version of Corrin seems to be the default use for any kind of advertisement of the character or anything else. So really, it's less weird that the female alt is on the mural, and more weird that they didn't just make the female version the default version. I mean, it's not like there's a hard rule that says the male alt has to come first. I mean, just look at Inkling or Wii Fit Trainer. Anyways, for Bayonetta, apparently the pendants that are on her smash attacks have a little inconsistency in them. For the default Bayonetta appearance, the pendants on her are platinum and blue, and are properly reflected in her smash attack limbs, which are hard to point out, but I imagine it's right here. And this is also the case for her Vast Within appearance. But for the original Bayonetta design, her pendants are normally gold and red, which are properly used in the Vast Within appearance, but for her smash attack limbs, they're still platinum and blue. I wasn't sure about this one since, as I've said before in the channel, I know basically nothing about this series, but on the surface level, yeah, I can see that being a little error considering how the Vast Within keeps the colors just fine, so that's easy to miss, but it's cool. Next is mentioned how on the no contest screen, Bayonetta actually grows in size quite a bit. Normally in a match she's a bit shorter than Ganondorf, but on this screen, she's now way taller. It's actually kind of hard to say how much of this is just Bayonetta growing and how much is Ganondorf shrinking. Since if we do the same thing with, say, Zorosuke Samus, who's normally at chest level, she appears almost at the same height now. And there's definitely a lot of characters who shrink in size, like Bowser, who gets very tiny. So I'm not going to make any claims that, oh, Bayonetta is the only character who grows in size like the Wiki does, but I still think this is pretty funny to point out. And obviously I don't think there's a lot of explaining to do. The reason why their sizes change is so that they can fit the no contest screen pose at around the same amount. And lastly for today's video is Inkling. First, it's mentioned how if you stop charging the ink tank, the framing gets full. The gauge on the character portrait will maintain its color borders, even though it should just be black and visible, as you can see here. And if you continue the charge, it won't get fixed, nor if you get KO'd. But using an ink-based attack will properly deplete the gauge, and refilling it like normal will fix this. But you can repeat this as many times as you want to. Next, in certain portions of the game, like say the sound test, normally they separate gendered characters using the words male and female for all of them. However, for Inkling specifically, they use the words girl and boy. This is definitely not an age thing either, since you have to remember that the Pokemon trainers are also children. Rather, it seems to be mimicking the wording used within the Splatoon series, according to the wiki at least. Again, it's another series I don't touch. At the very least, I can feel confident that this is meant to be specialized wording, because in the Japanese versions, while all the other characters just use typical words for man and woman, the Inklings use the English words girl and boy, which sticks out a lot more here, which is really interesting. What's also interesting is that when the Inklings have a final smash ready, the top of their head will actually be an inky aura effect matching their color, which I've never noticed before. Apparently this is meant to reference the games, when an Inkling has maxed out their special gauge, just with less flailing tentacles. And speaking of Final Smash, and last thing for today, it's mentioned how the background color used for their Final Smashes are actually dependent on the Inkling's gender. For the girls, it's blue, and for the boys, it's green. I was surprised that the difference was gender-coded rather than color-coded. I mean, you can imagine why they would want matching colors, since that would make the ink hard to see, and is why the green inkling, despite being a boy, has a blue background like the girls do. I guess I would have pictured them using a different color pairing per ink color, or maybe this is a reference too? Is this how it works in this game?
I got this. I'll be slightly
Did you know
more.
that apparently in an interview, Sakurai stated that Ridley's downtown was among his favorites? Yeah, the one where he just sort of stands. Well, okay, whether or not this is his favorite wasn't really said, but it was the one he decided to mention when asked what his favorite was. Which I find really funny because I kind of agree. Isn't this taunt just awesome? Anyways, as a refresher, when a character either gets a final smash or parries a move, their eyes will turn yellow for the effect's duration. Assuming that their pupils are visible in the first place, of course. Though even for when Game & Watch
I need to
changes his
skip
appearance
those
that
as
have
well.
eyes, they still can't
The
really
logs
glow
and
yellow.
stuff like that,
Also,
and even
for
the
Samus,
conversation with
her
Louise, I'm
visor
pretty
will
sure it's
change to
time.
yellow for these effects, which I found pretty
This is a
interesting,
loading
and I'm sure there's other
zone
weird
anyhow
examples you can bring
either
up.
as well.
Though for the odds where the visor is already yellow,
Anyway, we're not
there's
going back
no
for the
noticeable
golden
change.
egg.
Well, in a similar manner, because Ridley has a bad case of alien jaundice, he's the only character with visible pupils where these effects don't end up changing his eyes at all for any of his alts. Now, the more astute of you, or anyone who's heard this topic before, would know that Meta Knight also has jaundice. However, for his pupils under this effect, they actually turn red instead of yellow. Which makes you wonder why they wouldn't do the same thing for Ridley, right? I mean, Ridley with red eyes would be pretty cool after all. Also, of course, there are Meta Knight alts with red eyes, right? In these cases, the eyes don't turn yellow or anything, but rather the red that they normally turn into still has a different enough pattern from the normal case, with orange irises and stuff. So it's different enough. Speaking of Meta, for Meta Ridley specifically, his right wing isn't actually fully attached to his model. And I could probably make a political joke there, but I think I'll refrain. You can see how it's fully modeled at the back, but doesn't completely attach to his body, leaving this gap here. This is not present for the normal Ridley alts. Next is Mission Hell for Ridley. There's actually code in his
This
character
section
for
should be easy
colliding
enough. There's nothing that
which
Timothy
has
will tell you
obviously
here,
gone unused.
so I'll save once it's
this code
Ramon
is the same
5
as
minutes.
used for Charizard's
Ramon
Glide
5
back
is
in
a
Brawl,
bitch.
which he still has in his present day code, also unused. This either means Ridley was planned to have gliding at first, whose code was just ripped from Charizard, but they eventually scrapped it, or it means they just used Charizard as a base to some extent, and thus the unused code got carried over. Or maybe both. Either way, it's pretty interesting. Also, shout out to Meshima for making this Google sheet with all the information. And Zach Foster pointing it out to me in the first place and getting me these
And there's also
screenshots.
another one
Next, for
literally
some reason, Simon
right
and Richter's
next
Holy
door.
Water move counts as grabbing an item, despite the fact that you're clearly throwing an item, not grabbing one. There's a couple ways that you can prove this in-game, one of which we can do by going into the game stats and going down to grabbed items. Currently Simon is at 33, and Richter is at a whopping 1. So here in a versus match, I do 12 Holy Waters as Simon, 14 as Richter. First, in the victory screen stats, we can go down and see that the number of items grabbed mimics the amount of holy waters each character used, which already proves the point.
too much of a waste
Also, the
of
reason why
time.
Simon's projectile number is
Kill
higher is
only
because
who
I
I
accidentally used
deem
holy water when it
necessary.
wasn't ready to spawn, so I just sort of did the instant animation. And then, going back to the game stats, we'll see that Simon's item grab number is now at 45, an increase of 12, and Richter's is at 15, an increase of 14. While conceptually this still doesn't really make sense, there are other ways to see this effect. For example, if you catch another player's holy water as either Simon or Richter, and then use down B, you'll just throw their holy water, in a similar fashion to how you throw yours, but not quite the same. This is different from any other character holding the holy water, as their down specials will obviously work as normal. And additionally, when Simon or Richter are holding any other item, their down special simply does not work, as opposed to all of their other projectiles. So because you're already grabbing an item, the holy water won't function, because I guess you grab the holy water right before you throw it, and you can't like grab two items at the same time. Also, just out of curiosity, I did a few other tests. Normally when you throw someone else's holy water, it'll be as powerful as it normally is. Due to the nature of multi-hit moves, I can't really get an exact percent every time, but it's definitely in the same ballpark of around 60% or so. And the only real difference between using it with down special and just normally throwing it is just how far the projectile goes, as the damage of the bottle hitbox itself seems to be the same, and as far as I can tell the fire is as well. And And as for smash throwing it, the bottle hitbox does gain a 0.4% boost, but I didn't notice any increase in the damage from the flames themselves again. And given how far you throw the bottle, it's kind of hard to get all of the hits to work anyways, but practically speaking, every method of throwing it deals the same damage ballpark. But when Richter gets equipped with a powerful spirit, even though his holy water should do ludicrous amounts of damage, when it's picked up by Simon, who has no spirits, the damage it does is pitifully small. Actually, it's identical to if Simon used his holy water normally. And even if Richter picks his own holy water back up, it still does relatively low damage, only being higher than Simon's because Simon doesn't have any defense boost. What this tells me is that for the initial throw, the holy water will look at the attack stat of the owner, but after that point, once it becomes an item, the attack stat gets sort of reset to a base value and doesn't go back up. Since you have to remember that normally spirits affect how strong a thrown item is, so the fact that Richter throwing it again still results in lower damage means the attack boost is reset, I think at least. It's kind of funky how this whole mechanic works, but I like funky. Lastly for these two, in Richter's voice test, you can hear his sleeping sound which has him say Dracula towards the end of it.
I love the OST in this section.
This makes him, as far as I can tell, the only character to speak while sleeping. Well, hypothetically, at least. In practice, the voice clip is glitched. It gets cut off and looped before the whole thing plays, so we only ever practically hear snoring. So I guess, really, he doesn't say anything in his sleep. In fact, he doesn't say anything in the Japanese version, instead just going for a more normal snore sound. And just like before, the soundbite gets cut off before the proper loop, only hearing these snores inhale and not exhale. Next, for characters who have a unique grab animation, like for example Snake's chokehold, if it's used on King K. Rool anytime during his forward smash animation, where its boxing glove is on, it'll stay on for the duration of the grab. And unfortunately, it'll go away after the grab. Following that, it's mentioned how on Isabel's official Smash Ultimate site page, the color of her logo stays green, even though the background uses a chartreuse color instead. As you can imagine, it's supposed to be the case that the logo color changes to match whatever the background color is, but for this one I guess they forgot to change it from Villager's green. Next, it's mentioned how Unsho Ishizuka had managed to provide the Japanese voice lines for Incineroar right before his unexpected passing in August 13th, 2018, only a few months before the game's final release, or even Incineroar's trailer. A potential consequence of this is that the voice lines for Japanese Incineroar sound noticeably more muffled than in other languages. Just as a heads up, you'll probably need some headphones in order to really hear the difference, but here's some examples. I'm not sure if this is the case, but it's possible that they weren't able to get any of the lines re-recorded at higher quality, or however that works, due to his unexpected passing, and thus they were forced to use the original files. Either way, rest in peace, Unsho Ishizuka. Next, Incineroar is the character who has the least number of stages present in his classic mode route, which features only boxing ring for the main fights. I mean, it's actually kind of neat how this is the route that they took, but it's also kind of funny that that's all it is. I'm surprised he didn't take Magic Hand or Crazy Hand here either. Okay, so moving on to the Miis. For the individual three characters, there wasn't a lot written about them that I found very interesting. The only thing that I found was this prompt for Mii Brawler, which mentions how apparently in a tweet by Nintendo BS, it shows that the Mii Brawler's official name is Chris, which somehow feels like just the perfect generic name for someone like Mii Brawler. No offense to any Chris's out there, my name is also incredibly common, so I get it.
You dare
really, a lot of the
make
prompts
fun
came
of
from
the
the
red
wiki
cube
page of the Mii
bloodline?
fighters as a whole, so I'll end the video off by going over some of those. First, each of the Mii fighters' voice
That
types,
must be
which in
continued
the
at all
game exist only
costs.
as numbered titles, actually do have internal code names. Types 1 and 2 are young. Type 3 is passionate. Type 4 is active. Type 5 is cool. Type 6 is beauty. Type 7 is boy. Type 8 is girl. Type 9 is rough. Types 10 and 11 are warrior. And type type 12 is Gloomy. You should have let me know what your favorite voice type is. I couldn't help but feel like Beauty sounded a lot like S, and Girl kind of sounded a little bit like Kirby sometimes. I don't know, I think my preference for my Masterpiece B here would be the low-pitched Gloomy sound. Also, the Mii Fighters are the only characters who don't get a close-up of their eyes or face when they activate their final smash. Obvious reason being that, due to them being customizable, they couldn't really prepare an asset that matched their appearance, I assume. I always thought that there was something missing with these final smashes. They always felt emptier than the others. Yet somehow I didn't catch on to that, so
that's a spider, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 legs, yep.
Remember how earlier in the video I mentioned how by parrying or having a final smash at the ready, the character's eyes will become yellow? Well, this actually does include the bees, assuming that their eyes are even visible in the first place. Given how extremely diverse a bee can be, I'm honestly impressed that this is even a thing. They had to have somehow connected the effect specifically to whatever the bee's eyes are coded as. But while that's impressive, it also means for some of the more unique bee appearances, getting the effect may show the once hidden eyes change color, which is actually kind of hysterical. I guess they were really on Mobius's forehead, so that's good to know. There's kind of no limit to the amount of fun you can have with that, so I'll just leave you with that bit of knowledge if you didn't already know. And lastly for this video, the Mii Fighters are the only characters in the game who are not usable in every game mode. They're not playable in Classic mode, which is kind of funny because they do still appear in the Classic mode mural and can be fought in certain routes, nor in Smashdown, which I'm not gonna lie to y'all, I have not played in this game once. You can even tell because when I got footage for this video, when I clicked on the mode, I got the tutorial to come up. You can use them when testing a stage in Stage Builder, which I actually noticed like a day before I found this fact. And it's actually kind of unfortunate. I'm not sure why some of these are restricted like they are, but it really shows just how incredibly unique the Mii Fighters are as characters. Sometimes I take for granted just how cool it is to have characters that you can customize. I mean, I wish I had more fun playing as them, and the microtransaction aspect of some of their costumes is something that I love. But still, it's a really cool concept, and I do hope that they keep it going for any future games. Starting out with Piranha Plant, it's mentioned how it's actually very unique, and that it's one of the only characters whose splash screen doesn't use the DF Gothic font. Now, I don't really know what font it's using. If you compare it to the other splash screens, you can tell that it's slightly different. I look at how the A sort of curves to the side for DF Gothic, but for Piranha Plant, the A just goes straight down. Basically, every character's splash screen since Smash 4 uses the DF Gothic font. Here's me typing in that right next to it. Looks the same, right? I mean, a lot of Piranha Plant's trailer kind of felt bootleg compared to the DLC characters, or just anything else. But it's still kind of crazy that they wouldn't just use the same
do that
font
faster,
before.
but that's because I want
that's a different font
on New Game
Kazuya,
Plus.
though his uses the one that's present in Tekken 7's battle loading
It's good and
so
still do faster if I check the bolt thrower and mine
his
darts
name
and
itself
stuff.
still uses DF Gothic.
Add the egg.
Next, in a past wiki video, I brought up the topic of how when a character gets a parry or gets a final smash, there's a little glint effect that plays on their portrait and is placed right by their eye. Even for characters whose eyes aren't visible, the effect still plays around where their eyes would be. Though for the bees, it just does an approximation of where their eyes should be, rather than changing the placement based on where the eyes of the model actually are. Kind of like that thing we showed off in the last video with the eye glow effect from the final smashes or parries. But I guess it's fair. It's pretty close anyways. But Piranha Plant is the only character in the game who not only has no visible eyes, but also doesn't really have somewhere the eyes should be. So in their case, the glint effect happens over its tooth, which makes sense and is a funny little detail that I thought was charming, even if they made that decision out of necessity. Next, I vaguely remember about this, but Piranha Plant was initially meant to have 3 jumps,
4
instead of
minutes,
these
10
standard
seconds.
2. Credit to Meshima
On
for pushing this one.
I
The
have
animation for this
plenty
triple
of
jump is still
time.
present in this motion folder, so we can
I
see
got
it
this.
here,
1 hour and
as
20
compared to the double
minutes.
jump. With the biggest difference mostly just being that the triple jump is faster than the double jump. Apparently, this change happened on the day 1 patch, where its jump count max parameter went from 3 to 2, which makes it feel very last minute, right? Like it's not some remnant of them porting the character over to the past with the new character's code or anything. It sounds like they actually believe that having use a triple jump, and I guess change their mind last minute.
Good.
Though the fact that we don't see a triple jump in Piranha Plant's trailer does make me wonder if that's even the case.
I'm guessing
now,
it's
I don't
just
really play a lot of Piranha Plant, but but maybe one of the 4 people who do could give me their insight on how an extra jump would affect their playstyle. Personally, I'd be kind of down for it. I think seeing more Piranha Plants would be pretty cool, and having an extra jump is just objectively awesome, so... Oh, and if you give Piranha Plant an extra jump spirit, like I obviously would do for all of this footage, its new triple jump will just reuse the double jump animation rather than using its hidden old triple jump we saw earlier. Again, they both look super similar, but I counted the frames, and the spirit-assisted triple jump matches the frames of the normal double jump, rather than the unique and slightly faster unused triple jump. Which is a bit of a bummer, but it makes sense since the extra jump just reuses the previous jump animation normally. Next, much like the fact with
now
DK
for a
rules
question.
love from the last
My
video,
next save will
for
be my
Piranha
last.
Plants, if you get grabbed by a move with a unique grab animation while you're using side special, you'll maintain your different appearance for the duration
I
of
think
that
I'll
grab.
save in the regenerator.
This is also the case for his forward smash appearance, which gets a little bit funky when you look at it from the back.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Also, for the
Wow,
victory
that
animation
was a
where
really
Piranha
fast
Plant murders
chapter.
Mario,
Wow.
when he gets launched, you can actually hear the sound effect that you would normally hear in game.
Alright, stealth would be the
And
safest
I
and
just think
fastest
that
way
is
I can do
Oh, speaking of
the
Piranha
first
Plants,
section,
someone
so
was jumping over it. I've got to mention that the wiki had a prompt that goes over the mechanic where if a character footstools Piranha Plant while it's crouching, they'll do
my
a
save
unique
count is
bite
equal to
attack,
the chapter
which deals
count
about
right now,
5%
right? So,
and KOs
I mean,
starting
I
around
prefer not
250%.
saving in
And I
this
guess probably
chapter
has
and all, but what
it's
can
an
you
incredibly
do? I'm
unique attack type that no other character shares,
tired.
though given how weird it is to execute, it's also not likely to ever
I should be able to finish this tomorrow, which
Now,
is
I
an
know a lot
exciting
of you will be
prospect.
like, yeah, okay. But a not so insignificant portion of you will be dumbfounded, like,
I think I'll still
wait,
continue
that's
playing
a
Resident
thing?
Evil 4 for just a little longer.
Basically, not everyone lives online and knows a ton about the game. And if the information that grabbing and throwing an
Maybe
opponent has
try
made
doing
the
some
power of the
challenge
dragon,
run,
a
other
fact gone
challenge
over in
runs
good
and stuff.
detail during your showcase video,
Although
to
I have
surprise a
fun
lot of
just
people on Twitter,
looping
like
through the
so
game.
many people, it is fair
It's
for me
kind
to
of-
assume that a similar amount of people didn't
Because
know
of
about
the resource
this
management, I
Piranha
don't know
Plant.
why.
So leave a
Arlo
comment down
agrees,
below if this is
resource
your first time
management
hearing about
is
that.
fun
I'd like to
and
know that sort of
addicting.
thing. Anyhow, moving
And
on.
like most of
It's
my
mentioned how
playtime
Joker is one
in
of
Breath
the
of
few
the Wild, I
characters
say
in
I
the
have
game
like
who
thousands
fights
of
the
hours
ultimate
on
boss
that
on a
game.
stage that isn't Final Destination. In his case, he just goes to Mementos. The other characters are Donkey Kong, who sends up to New
And
York
the
City
big
Hall,
majority
and
of that
Sephiroth,
time
who fights him in
is
his home stage
just spent on
cave.
me collecting
You know, when I
stuff.
see this, I can't help but think, if they're willing to let Master Hand appear
And
in
Tears of the
stages
Kingdom is pretty
outside
much the
of Final
same.
Destination, then they really should have let him fight
Look
Incineroar
at
in
that.
Boxing Ring.
Ooh, the
We
final
mentioned
phase
that last
upgrade.
video, how every single classic mode fight for Incineroar takes place on Boxing Ring
And one
outside
last
the boss
exclusive
fight
upgrade if
and,
you
you know,
wanted.
the usual bonus stage. But if other characters can change up where they fight Master Hand, they should have done that here too. Okay, I get that there's probably some limitations with this stage and its background and how that affects Master Hand and stuff, but still. Also, can I just briefly point out how absolutely hard it goes that every stage of Sephiroth's classic mode is a boss fight? You really can't get much cooler than this character, can you? Next, for Hero, in Japanese, when you use your normal spells, Hero has a decent chance to say that spell's name aloud.
Increase ammo
Unfortunately, he
capacity
doesn't
and
bring
reload
any
speed,
down
why
special
not?
spells, but yeah, we can even see these voice lines as an option in the voice test.
For
This is
the
contrary
rifle,
to the other
I think
languages
that
where
would
we only
very
hear grunts.
useful. I don't need the case upgrade.
This is echoed in the voice test, which is 9 voice clips smaller than the Japanese version. It's a bit of a shame that these voice lines didn't make it over, and also a bit of a shame that they weren't
fuck
done
it,
for
let's
the
just
down
use the
special
ammo.
spells.
No,
But like, I kinda get
right.
it, because the spells are called different
There's one
things
less
in different
extravagant
languages,
crown
and they
I
might
can
have thought it'd be weird to have them say a different word. Though for the normal spells, it's not like there's a menu or anything, so it wouldn't really been that big a deal. Yeah, I don't know, I still would have liked it being present, but oh well. Also yes, all of this is the case for Kirby using Hero's neutral special as well.
Oh,
Okay, so this is a prompt I've seen before, but apparently
Alright.
Hero's down taunt is faster when he's facing
Looks
the
like
right when compared to
stealth
facing
is
the
not
left,
an option.
if it's uninterrupted. If we try to look at this ourselves, even just based on intuition, we
time
can kind
to
of see how
start
this is
blasting.
true. Hero, much like most of the roster, is actually mirrored when he
What
faces
the
in different
heck are you
directions.
doing?
So his back is so
Well,
much
whatever it is, it works.
facing left. Yet for the taunt, it has him face the screen no matter what. So when he's facing right, he's already facing the screen. So there's less frames needed to get him from the idle to taunt to back to idle.
Ow.
Whereas for the left-facing hero, there's a pretty
Oh,
noticeable
that was
amount of movement he has to
guaranteed
make to go from facing the screen back to this idle. I can't really give you the frame data the usual
Yes,
way,
rather.
you know, by buffering and shield input, because taunts can be cancelled, and thus it doesn't really tell me anything about the frame data of a non-cancelled taunt. And it's kind of
Nice,
difficult to
it missed,
tell
but in a good
exactly
way.
when the taunt ends
Died.
and when the animation begins. But that's why I asked
Nah,
Zephyr
that's right,
for
that's
the
good.
actual frame data of these animations. Thank you so much for that. When Hero is facing right, the taunt animation lasts 83 frames, and when he's facing left, it lasts 87 frames, a difference of 4, with, as we assumed, the left-facing hero being slower. Because this difference is caused by a combination of having a taunt that always faces the screen, and by the fact that Hero doesn't get mirrored when facing a new direction, that should cue you in that this is not a hero-specific thing. And you'd be right. For some other examples, this is true for Wolf's up taunt, which has a larger difference of 8 frames. You can really tell this one's here, since Wolf has to almost entirely reposition himself afterwards. And there's Kazuya's up taunt, which is different, but surprisingly backwards, with the left-facing taunt being faster. This is weird because, as normal, the left-facing idol has it back to the screen, sort of, and the taunt has him face it. But if you pay attention, you'll see that, for some reason, the taunt is sort of sped up. He crosses his arms faster, then starts transitioning away from the taunt faster. You'd think that this would maybe even things out, but I guess this winds up making the taunt end earlier. And the wiki failed to mention that it's also the case for Hero's up taunt, with another 4-frame difference. So yeah, while I didn't really test too extensively or get more frame data, it's pretty likely that if the character meets all the criteria I mentioned above, which is a lot of the characters, then their taunt animations as well as
evading is easier because at least unlike evasion, even in professional mode, how hard to do those still is the same.
Now trust me, I did a lot of thinking for how this could even somewhat become practical knowledge, but it's just not. As long as taunts can be cancelled, the information of how long your animation normally lasts doesn't do much. But you know what? The more pointless a fact is, the better. Huh, someone should make a series about that. And lastly for Hero, the wiki points out how a lot of the runes that are on his swords and shields are actually Anglo-Saxon runes, and thus have translations. Now, I'm a bit rusty on my Anglo-Saxons, but I didn't really find many sources about this fact, so I just pulled up a little alphabet sheet and tried to confirm it for myself. Erdrick's sword blade reads Dragon Quest, but spelled with a K. And his shield, as well as luminaries, both read Roto, which is Erdrick's Japanese name. Solo's sword hilt was, well, really hard to read, as you could probably imagine, but I looked at it a bit, and I think what the wiki says is generally right. That being that it says, Ichibi Karesi Mono, which is just a loose romanization of Ichibi Kareshi Mono, which means something like, Oh Guided One, or something akin to that. This is a reference to the Japanese subtitle for Dragon Quest IV, which is Ichibi Kareshi Mono Tachi, with the Tachi in this context just sort of pluralizing the subject that it follows. So, Oh Guided Ones, or The Guided Ones, or something like that. And while Luminary and Eight swords do have text inscribed in them, they're just not Anglo-Saxon and thus don't have any known translations, I guess? So, sucks for them. Next, because Banjo is the one who consumes food items, not Kazooie, when you eat the super spicy curry, only Banjo is the one affected, right? Which means when you use the Banjo and Kazooie dash, because it's now Kazooie facing forward and Banjo is sort of hanging on the back, that means the flames will shoot out from behind you instead of in front, which I think is a really nice example of paying attention to the details.
Oh good,
I mean,
I'm just gonna run.
The flames kind of curve and stuff, maybe due to momentum or something, so you still sort of end up hitting things that are in front of you, but the hitbox is definitely not the same, it still comes directly from Banjo. Oh, and even while Kazooie isn't affected by the super she still gains a frantic expression to accompany it. I mean, I guess I would
actually,
too if my
going
friends
for the
started
final
breathing
elegant
fire,
crown.
so I guess that's fair. Speaking
Or
of
should I just
fire,
keep running?
even though a lot of Terry's moveset uses effects that look fire-alike,
Off every
well,
second
at least I
counts.
think one could interpret them as being fire-related. They don't actually have the fire effect.
I mean, they're
instead
not
just
that
being
hard to
a
deal with.
normal
I
effect.
already made my
There's a
decision.
few ways you can test this, but the
Goodbye,
simplest by
final.
far is just using a blast box. Normally hitting this with any type of fire effect move, regardless of how strong it is, will activate it immediately. Yet Power Wave does not. So, there you go. I mean,
Goodbye
Power
to my
Geyser does
final
activate
elegant
it immediately,
crown.
but that's just because it's super strong, so, you know. Also, the wiki brings up how Terry's bind pose uses an A pose instead of the T pose like basically every other character does. This is a feature that is shared with Byleth and apparently Mithra. Though I guess not Pyra, just Mithra? I don't know how that works. Oh, and say hi to Zeclox again. Hi Zeclox. Now, in the past, this was something that we could see in-game, minus Mithra since she wasn't released yet. But since that glorious glitch was sadly patched out, and I still don't know any new way to get a character to T-pose or A-pose or whatever, I can't really do that anymore. Man, I would really love for a new method of doing that to come up, especially now that they're not, like, patching this game. Alright, moving on to the last character, Byleth. Apparently
Thanks
they're
to
the
how
only
many
fighting
ammo I
character
have, I'm
whose smash
barely
attack
getting
charge
any
uses
resources
the
anymore.
drum beat effect,
Which really sucks.
rather than what the others use, which I guess is more light, like a sword effect or something. And yes, every single Fire Emblem character uses that, not drum beat sound. Corrin's is a bit unique, but still got the same general vibe. I never really noticed these types of sound effect discrepancies, so that's pretty cool. I guess Byleth is getting those unique points for
Well,
using
good
something
stuff
that
anyway.
is a sword, so good for them. Next, did you know that while the Byleth demonstration video was uploaded on January 16th, 2020, or thereabouts for every language, for Nintendo of Korea specifically, this video was uploaded on January 22nd, 6 days after everyone else. I'm not really sure why this would be the case, and yeah, I actually don't really have anything to add there. It's just weird, and I like weird. And lastly for this video, for
Oh,
male
what did that
Byleth's
guy get
bright
me?
inputted victory screen, which looks like this, you might notice that there's a considerable delay between when the zooming happens and when the losing fighters pop up. Here's a comparison. The reason is apparently due to the effects that play for Byleth's whip during that freeze frame or something. And as far as I know, this is the only time that something like this happens. What this means is that you can actually progress through the victory screen before the loser comes up. And because progressing it pauses the UI in the background, that means you can completely ignore them, which I think is a pretty huge power play. Like, you're not even letting your opponent come up on screen after beating them. So I guess Sephiroth isn't the only one who goes hard here. The wiki says this doesn't happen for team battles, but I mean, it did for me, so I don't know what that's about. I still think this is really awesome, though. Minmin actually has some unused animations that are copied from Captain Falcon, specifically both the aerial and grounded version of Falcon Kick, which you can see here. Hello,
I'm not even getting all that much
Seeing
gunpowder
this kind of
anymore
stuff, I
either.
have to wonder how many changes and variations this character went through before we got the extremely unique finished product we have now. But either way, I guess Captain Falcon's presence in the trailer rubbed off on her. Now, you might be saying that they are in the final game, with the aerial Falcon Kick being her down air, and the grounded Falcon Kick being her dash attack. Well, you'd be right to say that they're similar, but they aren't the same. If you look at the animations side by side, you can notice the differences. Now, these differences are subtle, but you can definitely see that they're not identical. But are basically identical to Falcon Kick. I'm not very experienced in the field, but I feel like if Falcon Kick was used as a base for the finished product, then only the finished product would remain in the files, and these animations more closely resembling Falcon Kick would have just evolved to the moves we have now, rather than remaining as isolated unused animations. That's obviously just speculation, though. It's really interesting to think of either way. Oh yeah, speaking of her dash attack, for another unused trivia thing, dash attack actually has an unused reflector property. This information being provided by Meshima. Obviously, this idea ended up in the game through the form of her up smash reflector. Now, whether or not they wanted her to have two reflector moves, or if they just started with the dash attack and decided later on to move it to the up smash, I can't really say for sure, though the latter sounds more likely, obviously. Especially when you consider that having a reflector on a dash attack is kinda broken, right? I mean, at least it would certainly suck on a character with as much oppressive range as Minmin. You know, having that kind of effective burst option is not really cool for someone who has also huge range. So it's nice to see that it's tacked onto her up smash instead. Speaking of being broken, let's move on to Steve. First, the wiki reminded me of how the initial reveal of Steve on October 1st, 2020 led to such a massive influx of activity on Twitter that it resulted in the website becoming unreachable for a while. And I still very vaguely remember this, but I don't think I really noticed in the first place that much because I was still riding the high from his reveal. Like I was super hyped. But yeah, Steve was so huge that he started destroying websites, only to go on and destroy the competitive Smash scene now. Which, wow, I remember joking about how funny it would be if Steve was top tier when he first released, but it's kind of crazy how far that actually went. The wiki also provides another example of something so big happening that it kind of took down Twitter, just for perspective. That being the death of Michael Jackson on June 25th, 2009. Now, obviously, the comparison between Twitter activity in 2009 and Twitter activity in 2020 is a little bit different, but nuance aside, that basically means that Steve being revealed for Smash was as culturally impactful as Michael Jackson's death. And, I mean, nowadays, Twitter going to hell is just kind of the new norm, but back then, it really wasn't. Next, it's mentioned that Steve's code name in the game files is called Pickle. No, not that kind, no. It's the Japanese loanword pikeru, which is used to describe ice axes, which is derived from the German word ice pickle, with ice
Cat
being
ears
ice,
are
and
mine.
pickle being the pick, like used in our language for pickaxe. Though this is different from the word used in Minecraft itself, that being